All right. Morning, David.
Good morning.
So I just gave a little intro. Everybody spends 20 or 30 minutes now in advance of our recording and just interacts a little bit. And I do what I can to talk about focus and talk about the purpose of our discussion every week. And what we talked about today, and I'm sure more of it will come out because I don't tend to ever repeat things identically because I don't have them written down and I'm not following a script. But the essence of today's pre-conversation was to remind everybody, literally remind, like remember, rather than dismember our thinking, start to remind and recognize that we already have a knowing awareness if any of this that we're talking about happens to be true. It's not my words. It's everyone's opportunity to look accurately at their own experience and honestly to start seeing that they know, we all know, rather than think I need to say it in a certain way for everyone to know. So I don't come at this as a telling of the truth, but a simple pointing, referencing, angling per se, of noticing that if we're honest in our experience, we each have the chance to look at what is happening as it is happening, rather than as we think it should be happening, would be happening, could be happening, wished it was happening, and all those other things that never seem to be happening. So in one direction, we can launch a ship of absolute certainty. And the other direction, we can absolutely launch a ship with absolute certainty that launching that ship is going to sink because it's already at the bottom of the ocean when we start. So one is a commitment to failure that we choose, and the other is a commitment to begin to see that our human experience is dependent on decisions that work. If I go to eat and keep missing my mouth and have the food and keep throwing it over my shoulder, I'm not going to satisfy my need for food. And we have basic needs. And to undermine those needs is to subject ourselves to the rigors of illness and peril that are unnecessary, but seem within the constricted mind of thinking all I am is what I think, which is really not who I am. That's just thinking about itself, and the self it thinks of is born of thought. And it isn't thinking doing this alone. This is my choice to have thinking, contemplating itself, and make believe that all I become is what I think. That's the core of the mental illness, and I would say insanity. Because if my life is spent thinking about what I'm not as being all that I am, that's seeing and hearing something that doesn't exist, and that's a pretty well-defined definition for insanity. So this isn't a medical, psychological, I'm not part of the AMA or the psychological industry, but I am a human looking at my experience and doing the best I can on a daily basis to be honest about it so that I can talk about it in ways that help remind people what they already know, so that our experience and discussion can begin to explore beyond the limits of the thoughts that we would typically want to defend because they're at risk. And the risk that they're at is the fact that we're promoting them, projecting and promoting them as reality and truth, who we are, what I am, that's just who I am, that kind of thing. It isn't who I am when all I'm doing is thinking about a self born in thought. Who I am is actually what everyone else is too. So it isn't an I that's significant or different or distinguishable. It's an I that is absolutely indiscriminate and inviolable and immutable and indivisible. So it can't be divided. Why? Because we all share it. It's all infinite. It's not something that is, it's not a piece of a pie. It's all the pies and all the pieces and everything in one simultaneous, absolute present state of being that we all share right now. So the mental obsession is an addiction to the idea that all I am is what I think. And so what I do is I try to feel better about what's wrong. And if I'm feeling better constantly about what's wrong, all I am doing is getting better at reinforcing the idea that's wrong, making believe that the symptom, which is the feeling bad, is correcting what I'm doing that's bad in thinking by constantly trying to have it feel better. So no substance outside of my experience is ever going to be enough to solve that, because the more substance I feed it, the more it needs, because the problem I'm ignoring is growing the whole time. And any doctor who misdiagnoses a disease is only going to come up with a cure that won't work for the disease that he's dealing with. And for us to think that the solution to this is to feel better about what's wrong, is to get better at feeling what's happening isn't happening. That's just another form of delusion and denial and defiance. So our experience here is to notice that at the edge of Earth, I have two choices to do with what's happening. Primary choices. I can notice it and observe it and let it be. Or I can think that I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing while I'm doing what I'm doing and create an interminable conflict, because if I'm doing what I'm doing, thinking I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, I imagine it's possible not to be doing what I'm doing while I'm doing what I'm doing. That's crazy. And that's inner conflict and emotional turmoil. There is no emotional sobriety, since sobriety is about sanity. There's no chance to be emotionally sober when I'm constantly conflicted in the thoughts I have about who I am, because when I think all I am is what I think I'm the creator of reality and truth. And that's a major conflict with reality and truth. And the irony is, reality and truth don't change at all when I think those things. But my human experience changes dramatically when I impose those ideas and induce those thoughts on my experience. I become dysfunctional. My capacity becomes diminished, because instead of being able, I am disabled. So my capability is reduced. And it isn't an accident, and it's not a curse, and it isn't something happening to me, except to the thinking I'm doing to justify I'm not doing what I'm doing, which again means what's happening isn't happening, and all I'm thinking about is what isn't happening, thinking that if I think about it more and more and more and more, someday it will get better, and someday what is wrong will be right. Again, another trail of this same sort of interminable inner conflict and emotional turmoil and dis-ease that I'm creating in my own thinking. And it undermines every aspect of my body and my body's systems and their ability to function, which is pretty good evidence that what I'm thinking is wrong, period. So self-righteousness is thinking a self that I think up and thought is right. And righteous indignation is generally an offense that anyone might think differently than what I'm thinking, because I become highly sensitive to what everyone else is thinking when I start thinking that all I am is what I think. All of a sudden, any thought that's contrary to mine becomes an offensive thought or idea. And why is that? Because a lie requires defense, because it has no basis other than in what I think. Lies do not exist in the universe. Egos do not exist in the universe. They exist in the minds of humans, the brains of humans, not even the minds of humans. Our brains think, our beings know. That means there are very distinct qualities to our present beingness that isn't based on thinking. And as I begin to concede those qualities and begin to notice that that is a knowing awareness that I know, all of a sudden the things I'm doing that are dysfunctional in thought become obvious. Rather than things to fix, I begin to realize it's the fixation I have with the fixing of them that is causing them to continue, because I'm actually believing they're real and true enough to actually repair. It's like having an imaginary car and taking it to the repair shop and asking them to do an oil change. We laugh at that here as a thought, but it's exactly what we're doing with the ideas we have about trying to fix a thing that doesn't exist. It's insane. And we create manifest problems to justify that what we're doing is right. So we can say, see, the problems are out there. I knew this was going to happen. Of course you knew it was going to happen. You created the whole thing. Yet we blame it and shame it and feel guilty for it. Why? Because we know better. Self-loathing, self-abuse, self-abasement, everything when it comes to self. If you look at those words combined in the dictionary, especially an old written dictionary, because they'll come up in pages of self-made, self-help, all that kind of stuff is based on a self that is imagined. It's not real. You can't get enough self-help. There's a $10 billion industry now helping people feel better about what's wrong. It's basically helping the addiction grow, because the idea is if I can fix the symptom, the problem goes away. The fact is, even the big book in Alcoholics Anonymous says that the bottle is a symbol, alcohol is a symptom. What is it? Of an underlying disease that's mental, centers in the mind. What's centered in the mind but a thought thinking of itself, centered in thought? Not me, not I, not you, not us. A thought thinking of itself that I generate by choice. Why do I do it? Because I'm crazy. Why would I do such a thing? Because I'm sick. And if I keep relying on those sick thoughts, I'm going to generate more sick thoughts to try to fix them. And I'm going to be in what we call a mentally obsessive state, which is absolute insanity, because I'm focused only on what isn't happening and wondering why what is happening is getting worse, because I'm paying no attention to it whatsoever. If I was driving on the freeway and said, God is great, I am in an infinite universe that takes care of me, and in the fast lane, closed my eyes and took my hands off the wheel, things probably wouldn't go well. While in fact, my claims of God being great and in being in an infinite universe would be true, the mechanism of my human experience would be ignoring what I'm actually doing, which would cause problems naturally, because that car would go where it goes and probably hit the center column and bounce off and maybe hit another car and kill somebody. And it wouldn't be a surprise. It would be an absolute consequence of a thought that imagined that the things I can do with my body, I can stop doing, and somebody's going to do it for me, in the exact same way that I make believe that everybody is doing everything that's causing the problem against me. I end up using God in the same insane way, rather than saying, if there is a God, if there is an infinite source, I've already got everything. The question is, why don't I utilize it? If an infinite source is an infinite source, it doesn't give or take. It doesn't come to my rescue only when I'm desperate and finally willing to concede my involvement with that source because of my own desperation. It doesn't just show up and say, oh, I've just been waiting for you to call. We have endowed God with human characteristics. He comes and goes. He doesn't answer my prayers. It's like not getting a text back from somebody. He's busy. His lines are full. His voicemail is full. They're all narratives we create to justify the idea that all we are is what we think, and that must all be God is too. And that is a great definition for ego, because it's pretty interesting that we can dismiss something that's absolute and infinite and not an option and not negotiable if it is that thing. It just is what it is, regardless of what we think. And we can dismiss it by making believe more reliance on my thinking proves it isn't there. And all I need to do is behave better and it'll finally reveal itself to me. That seems like self-abuse to me. That seems like self-loathing. I can't do enough to ever appeal to that thing, because all I'm doing is ignoring the absolute nature of it, the loving nature of it, the supportive nature of it, that doesn't come or go, that isn't optional, that isn't negotiable, that doesn't change. In the name of making believe, if I think of it wrong, I'm going to fix it. And I'm going to do enough to get there. And what I need to do is develop a self that counts. We all count. We wouldn't be here if we didn't count. We wouldn't be worrying if we didn't count. We wouldn't be wondering if we didn't count. We wouldn't be asking if we didn't know. We'd have no inclination to ask. What we're asking is, why do I keep doing this over and over and over again? Why do I keep getting stuck in the mud and wonder why my feet track shit in and mud everywhere I go? Like it's a surprise. Like, gee, wow, my boots are dirty. Of course. What are they going to do? I've been walking in mud. I'm going to carry it in to wherever I go. Anyway, I don't know what I got and what I missed in relation to what we talked about initially, but your keen ears and your absolute knowing nature, I would suggest, would allow the potential for that to be discussed now. Morning, Nick.
Morning. Well, afternoon here then.
So we're just at the end of the intro, which was 20 minutes. And reaffirming the purpose of looking in our discussion beyond the limits of our thoughts as a beginning, rather than defending the limits. And the difference is, one, we defend from a self-centered in the thought that we think we are. The other is done from our observatory knowing capacity to notice that we're well aware of what's beyond the edge as soon as we look, and that it's up to each of us, not me. It's not my words. I'm not telling the truth. I don't know the truth in my thinking, but I know that if truth exists, we all know it in our essence and in our being, and that's what I am focused on and addressing, so that we speak on that basis and start to notice that we absolutely do share this thing, because the things we say in that vein will become evident to each of us as you hear it immediately, rather than a debate over the defenses we create and the smallness of the ideas that we try to maintain as all we are and what we think. Exactly. I was barking the whole time, but in English. So welcome, fellow beings and personas. Jackie, good to see you. Nick, I haven't seen you for a little bit or talked to you.
Hi, good to be here.
Thank you.
Jackie, I love you.
I love you too.
So
Aloha.
at least we're starting on the note of what we absolutely share, which is love.
It's only love is real.
Yeah. So if we're developing ideas that aren't real and we are committed to the idea of trying to make them real, I would suggest it's what we think we don't think we're doing that we're really struggling with. And in this conversation, that's interesting. David and I, David, who's here now, did a podcast episode last week, and we're going to do another one sometime next week, I think, about his experience in prison. And one of the points I made in advance of him coming on, I saw your name come up, David, and I saw you coming, but I didn't wait for you to return. But I talked a little bit about our conversation and the fact that maybe you want to describe what happened in prison when you heard that scream. Because I thought that was very telling in relation to what we're talking about and these near-death experiences, which I would consider near-life experiences, because we're admitting how immediate the life is that we have, rather than thinking we need to be pushed to the limits of being scared to death to finally admit it. But I think what you experienced basically spoke to it as a direct experience that was unsolicited and a perfect metaphor for what we're discussing here.
Yeah, at that time, I've heard it a few times while I was in there, but to see something and hear something like that, as I was saying before, it was just something that'd just, shake your soul just hearing it. And, and then seeing this person afterwards.
So what did you hear? Describe that to everyone who doesn't know.
I just heard someone just like have this bone chilling scream, like just kept yelling and screaming, because of they broke, trying to hold on to who they were and fighting to keep that sanity, as you say, that they created, but being in reality at that time, in that moment, and arriving there, like mentally, emotionally, and physically, they just screamed. And it was just one of those screams where you think someone is down there attacking them, like, us is like, damn, there must be a spirit on him or something. But
it sounds like somebody's being killed, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes, which definitely would amount to the fear we have associated, the ideas we have attached to the self we think we are in this case.
Yes. Yeah, and then seeing that person afterwards, and it's like everyone is just looking at him, and I listened to the podcast at least 3 times since we did it, and just to embrace what was being said, and it's and I was thinking like, wow, we must have been looking through a lens, like saying, I don't want that to happen to me, because I don't want the world that I created to come crashing in on me like that. And here it is, I have to face the truth, and it's been on my mind as I was, I text you and I said, what, peace has a different meaning after that podcast. After we talked and I listened and listened and listened, I picked it apart, and it was just like, wow, because I kind of lost you a little bit when you hit me with a lot of different metaphors, and your tricky way of talking, and you're thinking what you're thinking, and you're thinking and think, and it's like I had to go back and catch all of that, take some mental notes. But freedom, freedom and peace is different as far as in how I see it, in a perspective of thinking about it.
So tell everyone what he looked like when he came out of his cell, when you saw him, and how you said it to me, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah, peaceful.
But you said, I'm almost embarrassed to admit.
Yeah, that it was peace. I hate to say that it was peace. Yeah, he had arrived at peace, because it's like hearing it, I was afraid.
But part of the hating to say it is starting to notice that that's what we're refusing to experience by maintaining the hateful, spiteful, contemptful ideas we have that are filled with fear and self-loathing. So isn't it interesting that the one thing we don't want to let go of is actually the thing that's killing us, in the name of saving us from the absolute peace that we have, that is in fact the life that can't end. And I think your comment to the fact that everybody else got chilled by it, bone chilling as you referred to it, means that everyone was also witnessing simultaneously their connection to the thoughts they had that they are afraid of because they're not true, posing as truth and reality. Yes. Without even recognizing what it is, but simply knowing, I certainly don't want to go there, because it would mean facing everything I'm denying right here.
Yeah, everyone's going to see me for who I truly am.
Yeah, whoops. Yeah. Let's not go there.
Yeah.
let's not start where we are. Let's not be as we are. Let's continue the parade, the masquerade parade.
Yes.
The charade.
And as you said, the ego exists in the mind, not in the universe. And being in prison and each one of those cells had two egos in there that we all created that's trying to dominate the other ego, so we can be the king of the hill while we're inside of a place like that. And as I was saying, peace, like I started thinking about it, and it was just like you spoke about thinking of the past, and you can't get out of the past, and then which interferes with the future. You say you bore a hole into your future, and because you're not in the present. And I said, well, if I'm seeking peace, and I'm seeking peace through the traumas I've been through, then I'm not getting out of the past. I'm still looking for peace back there, trying to come to terms with what I've been through, and which is interfering where I'm going. So being peace, the turmoil is coming from me seeking the peace instead of just accepting the peace. That's, like you say, it's right here.
Exactly. You're thinking that it's up to your thinking to find peace, when in fact the thinking is always going to be on a terror run, because it's being asked to terrorize you in the name of giving you an impression that it exists, because you're full of fear. So you can say it's real. People say this to me all the time. Well, the fear is real. I say, well, actually reality has no fear in it at all. Yeah. What's it afraid of? It has nothing to fear. It has no beginning, no end. It just is. It's always new. It's always available. It's always present. So if you go back to David, I didn't say anything about being out of the present. I simply said, when we're not thinking about what is present, we think we're not in the present. That doesn't mean we're not in the present. We're actually in the present thinking we're not. That's a major conflict. That's a collision. That, in auto insurance terms, is considered an accident. In human terms, it's considered an absolute consequence of thought, not something that shouldn't be expected, but something that will always come as a result of that setup that we cause.
Yeah, it gives that picture that you described of holding the bars. Yeah, and me trying to find that peace. Now I see why he was holding those bars in that picture, because it's like I keep reliving that horror, and something that I created for myself, so to speak. And some of the times I'm continually incarcerating myself because that's what I knew. You know, like coming home from prison, I had to be home for 2 years and 8 months just to have half of my life free. And that part, having that realization, like it bothered me because it was like, damn, I've been in this box for all this time. That's who I am. And that's how I seen myself. And I would remain quiet because I didn't feel like I was like regular people. You know, I thought different, I felt different. But the truth of the matter is I was afraid because I didn't feel like I fit in.
2 quick points. The bars David's talking about is something that Herb Kagan and Alan Berger use, who do emotional sobriety work. And the original picture has a guy in a cell in the middle of an open field in a box, literally in a concrete box with bars. And then they get sober, and all of a sudden the condemnation of the substance abuse and all that, they're free of it. But the guy now is standing in that same field holding the bars. There's no room. He's not in a room. He's just holding the bars up to his face as though he's looking through it. And David made the metaphor about the elephants. When elephants are born, that they're trained to stay on a chain. They leave them on a chain, and eventually the elephant thinks that's as far as they can go, so they can remove the chain, and the elephant will never go beyond that limit. It's exactly what we do in the thinking we have. So part of the point you're making now that I think is very metaphoric for what we're talking about is the fear did not end when you were outside of a circumstance that is filled with violence and conflict and limitations, and all that imposition of being in prison was gone, and you came out into the seeming free world and started actually struggling with the anxiety and the stress that built up, but you'd never actually learned to deal with. You started learning about that after you got out because the freedom didn't feel that free. So speak to that a little bit.
I mentioned also was that I began to forget things. I couldn't harness the information that I had. Like in there, it was confined. So I guess you could say it was bouncing off the walls and coming back to you because you're in such a tight confinement. But coming home, now you're dealing with all these different personalities.
There's also a lot of control, a lot of presumed effort. Your effort, your day is mapped out by a limited scope of opportunity.
Yes.
Becomes very simple in one regard.
And one of the ways I was able to do the time and pass it was I became busy to where I tried to raise myself above the bars or the barbed wire, so to speak. And just to fill my mind with information, because if not, I remain stagnant. As you're saying, that stagnant water, it just becomes poison. And so does the mind and the spirit, or our soul, because as you said earlier, we're connected by our spirit, all the spirit of mankind. But staying stagnant and not putting new information in your mind to live with, you start having these dreams that won't stop, same thing. And it's because I didn't have new information.
Well, and it's really a daydream too. It's not just a nighttime nightmare. It's a daydream that is really scary because we're starting to see how dominant our thinking seems to be. When you say that our spirit is, I don't suspect the spirit's ever affected in the essence, but we think it is because we start to notice the impairment of our ability to express our greatest asset. All of a sudden, we know that we're functioning on a diminished capacity because our capacity and expression of it is clearly diminished. We're witnessing it.
Yes.
And my sense is, you can obviously correct me, but my sense is as you came out of that constricted environment and started thinking you were free, you began to see the thinking was condemning you and nothing else. The thoughts you had were relative to thoughts you began to think were true and real rather than simply noticing that they didn't exist. They were just thoughts.
Yeah, the landscape started to change. When you're in prison, there's no grass or anything like that. Everything is concrete. And then when you're coming out and you start to see all these things that are alive, and you get to see things that are peaceful and in sight, and having choices. It's like, I'm not used to having all these choices here. So I'm trying to download everything, and it just wasn't working. And I started to spiral, and then finding that wall. I needed to hit that wall, which was the alcohol. So I would drink constantly. I would drink a bottle a night sometimes, but I called it being spiritual because I lit a fire.
So that's why they call it. That's why they call alcohol spirits.
yeah, got you.
So we can actually say, well, it is spiritual. But again, you're creating an effect by feeling better about what's wrong, and yet there isn't a lot of support or systems built to actually look at what's wrong honestly. Sobriety is one of those areas, and yet even in sobriety, looking at this aspect clearly isn't always everyone's experience, because once they're free of the condemnation, what's interesting is what we're really afraid of, because a lie is only afraid of the truth while it's claiming to be the truth. It just shows how twisted the whole thing is. The one thing that actually is ever present and absolute and doesn't rock us and isn't diseased and isn't unhealthy and isn't unnatural is the one thing we are afraid most of, because we're trying to defend the fear and think that we can control it by limiting it and feel better at it, because we're all in a cycle of thinking about thinking, or always in a cycle about thinking. Thinking is the source, because we've literally made believe thinking is in fact our source, because it's all we've done. It becomes all that is. And if it's all that is, it has to be real and true. So the one thing it can't be is the only thing we claim for it to be. And the one thing that will solve it is the one thing we run from, which is actual truth and reality.
Yes.
It just shows how sick the cycle is. And clearly, if we have brains that are designed to function, and we fracture our experience into thousands, millions of little pieces, like a kaleidoscope, and then look at the world and wonder why we can't make sense out of it, it's like looking through a kaleidoscope. Nothing adds up. Nothing looks the way it should. So it's very disconcerting to the perception and causes more fear and more fear and more fear. And what do we need to do? Feel better. And what do we do? More and more and more and more of the same thing that's trying to help us become numb to our sentient experience. So sensibility becomes nonsense. And functional capacity becomes dysfunctional. And all of those things start to manifest as reflections of what we're thinking. But since we think it's not our thinking, because we think our thinking is our solution and our salvation and our truth and reality, we just keep doing more and more and more and more of it and wonder why it doesn't work. And that old adage of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, is the definition of insanity. Yes. Like the other definition is seeing things that aren't happening, and hearing things that aren't happening is a pretty good definition too. And when I'm thinking constantly about what isn't happening in the name of my thinking, it's all that's happening. That means I'm not thinking at all about what's happening. And it doesn't mean I'm not present. It means I'm not paying attention with my human capability to what is in fact happening. And as a result, I'm not interacting with it in ways that would be meaningful and useful. Very
Another question.
Uh-oh.
I do too after him.
Yeah, me too.
So, because of David's Zen monastery experientials, my question is that we talk about, being, in thought and not being present and things of that nature. But
no, we don't talk about not being present. We just talk about thinking of things that aren't present because they don't exist. We're in the present. Correct. Thinking of things that aren't present. That's the conflict.
Yes. So, but my question to him is, how much time does someone in this condition spend looking at what's in front of him versus thinking?
It's interesting that you said that, John. One of the things that helped me get through my time period, and I learned it on an accident, is a mirror. They sold us mirrors in the canteen, and someone stole a mirror of mine. So anytime I went into the bathroom, they had a mirror sitting on thing, I would just take it. Yeah, I'm not gonna even go give it back to anybody. And to where I had a collection of mirrors under my bunk that were sticking there. And I didn't realize how often I looked at myself in that mirror. And like you saying, facing myself. And one of the hardest things it was for me to do was sit there and stare in my own eyes, which is hard for anyone to stare in their own eyes in the mirror. But to sit there and look at myself, and when I wrote a letter or I was listening to music, whatever, I just looked at me and trying to love me. Seriously, like, do I like who I am? And I didn't realize how important that was until, they raided the sales, and then they took all my mirrors. You have way too many mirrors. And I became lonely to where when I went to canteen, I even asked, because you're only allowed to buy one mirror. I asked a few people to buy me a mirror so I can put back up my wall of mirrors so I can see myself again. So it took me to appreciate myself, looking at myself and say, I like who I am, because I was so self-conscious about everything. So, and I don't know if that answered your question, if you wanted to reiterate some other parts of it, but that part right there just stood out to me, saying, the time I had to use to face myself.
No, I got it. Thank you.
And
see, I'm sorry, I stepped on you.
Just a quick note. What's interesting was we call it ourself when we're looking at it, but in fact, it isn't us. It's a reflection that has no blood, it has no sight, it has no hearing, it has no taste, it is absolutely a reflection. It's exactly what happens when we think about our thinking. It creates an image that is just an image. It isn't who we are. It's what thinking does when it thinks of itself. It creates a reflection of thought. So how do we end up acting? We think we need to think more confidently and think more lovingly to a self that doesn't even exist, because we're trying to love the mirror on the wall rather than realize as soon as we step away, there's nobody to love.
That's deep.
What? No, it's very superficial. Very superficial. So
Also,
the difference is starting to notice that the thing we think we are, when we're in this discussion that we often fight for, is only being fought for because we keep standing in the face of that reflection, thinking it's who we are, and we're going to define it better and speak to it louder and insist on it more and persist in wondering why we feel disjointed and disconnected and alone and can't quite get it together. And where's the peace in all this? Well, there isn't any peace in making believe who I am is a reflection of my thinking. It's just a reflection of thought. When I think of it accurately, it's like, oh, that's just what I'm thinking. It isn't who I am. It's just what I'm doing. It's like if I kept slapping myself and thinking, I am a person that is slapped. Who I am is being slapped. No, what I'm doing is slapping. John.
Bitch slap.
Yeah, bitch slap. Exactly.
That goes back.
And what am I doing as a result? Bitching about slapping myself when I am the one doing it.
See, what separate from your bitch slapping. What I'm, this is a man who spent, an entirety of his life, in a really hostile environment where he has to be on, in a sense that probably most of the people who are listening to this don't even understand how much on he has to have. So when he's in confine and secluded and off, he has to somehow turn the machine on and off to be able to, as he said, look in the mirrors. I mean, it's profound.
And that's so true. I spoke on that, trying to regulate when I had to be on and when I had to be off, and to where it was like, how do I do that? And a lot of times, just witnessing things, people do that in there by having an act of violence or something, doing some idle mind is the devil's workshop, as they used to say. And I would watch people just do shit for no reason at all. And it's because, like you said, we didn't know how to regulate that, especially those of us that went in as kids and became men in there. I rite of passage in prison. You know, I started my career going to jail at 15 years old. And when I was in my 30s, I still thought and moved as if I was a child in some respects until someone tried to challenge that, and then I would be, oh, I'm a motherfucking man, you know. And then now we have to stand up for being that, you know. And how do you stand up? Doing every instance we had when we were challenged, it was like, okay, and that's why my hands look the way they do. They're all broke up because I was fighting all the time when I first got in there. But it took me a while to say, wow, I don't want to fight no more. This is not getting the result that I'm looking for, which is some type of peace.
So, John, one of the questions you asked is how much time. I would suggest that as long as we maintain ideas we don't think we're thinking, we are constantly maintaining conflict 24 hours a day while we're imagining we're getting better because we're not feeling it, while in fact we're desensitizing and numbing our experience to things that are critical for our survival, which flips our instincts backward. And all of a sudden we start doing exactly the opposite of what instincts are designed to do, which is to threaten our own existence rather than use them to know exactly what to do to survive and thrive. Flips everything around. And David's experience is really metaphoric for the sense of prison and the sense of doubt and the sense of uncertainty and the sense of low self-worth and the sense of low self-esteem and all of those other things, self-doubt, self-loathing, self-abuse, all that stuff, self, are all conditions of that go on 24 hours a day in our dreams, in our waking state of dream, in our waking nightmares we create. All of it is happening all the time because we haven't come to terms. It isn't wrong to be doing it. It's wrong to think that it's actually something to do. I can imagine all I want, and it has no impact on me when I realize it's just imagined. When I think it's true, just like when I think my thoughts are true, I begin to think I am my thoughts and I am the creator of reality and truth. That is a major conflict with everything that is going on in my experience, not some things, everything.
Wow.
And it never has an impact on truth reality at all, except to my delusional ideas about what I think is real and true. Herb Kagan says that the alcoholic is allergic to alcohol, meaning he cannot metabolize. He cannot, what is the word he uses? He cannot process alcohol. The mental obsession is not being able to process an ego. We can't stand the lack of reality in what we're doing, so we feel ashamed, we feel guilty, etc. And my experience is that many people are convinced that trying constantly to feel better about what's wrong has them better when what they're getting better at doing is denying what's wrong in the name of thinking the symptom, feeling better with the symptom is somehow going to solve the problem, while it helps manage the problem, and anything well managed is maintained. So the problem is actually growing, just like a disease would if a doctor said, you've got a cold and you've got throat cancer. And he said, I'm going to give you some Advil and something else for your runny nose, and come back in a year. What are the chances you're going to be better? It's exactly what we're doing in our own misdiagnosis of what's happening, is thinking it's the symptom that's wrong because we don't like how it feels. So we're going to feel better, rather than notice it's the thinking we're doing that's causing the wrong. And rather than resolve it where it starts, we constantly think about it as trying to fix it where it's ending, where it's happening, where the effect is our experience.
I have a question. Well, first off, David and Jack, please try to meet me where I am here rather than tell me where I am. Okay, Jack. This whole conversation with what we were talking about before we started recording has really basically boiled down to me as mind, body, and spirit. So I was born and raised in Texas, and also in a very Southern Baptist church. So, David, when you referred to the guy in prison, or you guys in prison, and when he had this break and you heard that primal scream, and y'all thought the devil was all over him. You know what I mean? So what my question is, I was constantly told the devil was everywhere and all over me, or the devil was coming, everything, to where my current sponsor just could not get me. He said, well, let's not focus on the devil, because everything became the devil's fault. And which is a great excuse, but at the same time, I really thought that. So spiritually speaking, what, I don't even know how to ask this question, but there is negativity in the world. I mean, I can feel different energies, so I know this negativity, but how do you put that together with your spirit to where you aren't, what am I trying to say? That, how do we turn that around into a positive? I know God is real. I think Jackie said something about love is real. Well, love is God. What is the thing in our spirit that does feel the devil, or can you relate to what I'm saying? Or how do we turn it around to make the devil work for us, not against us?
Well, the way that I see it is that old painting that they had of Jesus at the door without the doorknob on it is something that you had to invite in. The devil is only real when you invite him in. And that devil, like as Jack is saying, is in our thoughts. So if I'm thinking of God, then I have love surrounding me. But if I'm thinking of evil thoughts, now I got the devil, and I just invited him in, and he's the host. And I'm letting him control me, which is me, which is inside of me. I'm controlling myself in an evil demeanor. So that's the way that I got rid of it. So if I'm feeling something and I feel like, do I believe in spirits and stuff like that? I was taught to believe in spirits. So when I feel something spooky, I'm like, oh, it must be a spirit there, and it's like when I first came over here to this unit that Jack has, and it was 2 units combined as one. I invited a friend over who just did 15 years, and the lights were off, and he seen a painting that was in here of the Abu Ghraib little scene where the guy had the black robe on. And this man you've been in the street, you done shot at people, you sold drugs and everything. Then he tells me, are you scared to sleep in here at night? And I'm like, what? I'm like, did you really just say that to me? And he said, no, that painting right there, like it's just going to come out and get you. I said, man, that's all in your mind. I walk around in darkness, So, but what you were saying, I made jest of it, but I think it's just something that we invite in. Our fears fears start to take over, and they start to spook us, to where, as I was speaking about that gentleman that was screaming, it wasn't his fear of, just being afraid anymore. He confronted it. And once he was able to tackle that fear and confront it, that's the way that was the fight. The fight was that scream. He was in there and, so to speak, fighting that spirit. He was fighting the devil, like, get up off me. And all he had to do was open the door. As I was speaking earlier, know that peace was right there for him. And he made that choice to be peaceful.
Wow. Thank
So
you.
a couple of points too, Loretta. If we are constantly restarting the quest to figure it out, we're constantly re-engaging the reactive thinking that's causing the problem in the name of trying to think someday we'll figure it out with more thought. And as you and I have discussed many times, if the present is always at peace and we are preoccupying our experience with something that is not peaceful, it is what we are doing with what we have right now, each of us, all of us, everywhere, that is causing the impact, while we are using spirits as though it's spirits doing it to us. Think of this. We will use any excuse, including say, God isn't there for me anymore. We will use the infinite source in the universe to justify what we're not willing to admit we're doing. That's
Right.
a pretty glaring. What does it say in the Bible? It says you can't see what's right in someone else when you have a mote in your own eye. MOTE, which is an obstruction, like a splinter. If I get a piece of sand in my eye, it's very hard to see anything. It's a grain of sand. I could say, well, that's nothing. Well, actually, to my vision, it's a lot. But the ultimate vision we have is in our understanding. It's not in our sight. It's not in how we see things, because how we see things is how they appear, because all we see in our eyes is a visual shape and form and color. We don't see the substance of the body that's working in these incredibly intricate ways to even present itself to be seen, unless it's decomposing on a thing and the life force is actually no longer in it, which is why we call the body the remains. Why would it be the remains if something hadn't left? What would be remaining?
Yeah.
So the point is that we instigate, and reactive thoughts tend to function by causing more reactive thoughts. If our nature is peace and we begin simply to close our eyes, and which is, well, meditation is great at doing this as a start point. But if we don't begin to notice that whenever we meditate and whenever we're willing to look beyond our thinking, there seems to be peace. And then we think when we open our eyes, there's no more peace because now we're thinking things that are in conflict, and not notice it's what we're doing in thought, that peaceful nature is still absolutely our present state of being and awareness. And all we're doing is thinking things that are in conflict. All of a sudden, the thinking becomes right-sized in the sense that it's seen for what it is, rather than being thought of as all that it is, all there is. It's no longer the source of it all. It's simply something we're doing. Why? Because it's something we're doing. It's something we're causing. It's something we're instigating. And my experience is there's never total peace in the issues I'm dealing with, because I'm only dealing with issues that I haven't reckoned with yet. I'm only trying to learn how to make things work better, because I obviously haven't done enough in that direction to be good at it enough to say, wow, these are really exciting challenges I get to face today, rather than really depressing dilemmas I keep wondering won't stop and won't keep going.
Yeah.
And to David's point, I choose that. My sense is, in the religious aspect, maybe there's a devil and maybe there's a Satan. But if you remember the story, what was it about him as an angel that he chose to do? Act alone. Act as though he was disconnected from God. He wanted to be God. What is ego? The attempt to make believe all I am is what I think, and I become the creator of that reality. And it isn't real at all. It's a delusion. So if there is a Satan, and we can be free from our own awareness of what we're doing, that thing has nothing to fear whatsoever, because it's no more than the same delusion we're imposing on our own experience. Just like alcohol. We used to think alcohol was the problem, cocaine was the problem, drugs were the problem, Oxycontin was the problem, all that stuff. It wasn't. The problem was my thinking I could control it and enjoy it, when I obviously can't even control and enjoy the thinking I'm doing about the things that don't exist, and aren't willing to even admit they don't exist to even think I could possibly ever control them. That's unmanageability in the first step, the second half. That our lives have become unmanageable is the awareness that once the drinking stops, I'm starting to face the thinking that caused the misery, that gave me the impression that altering my experience would be the solution, when in fact, all I was doing was giving me a new false impression to think the symptom was the problem rather than the cause of the thinking I was doing. Reactive thoughts, always going to choose reactive thoughts. But the difference is, it isn't a reactive thought. We talk about it as though it's happening to us, even in the words with the spirits. The spirits are haunting me. No. I'm haunted by my own choices. And I'm so sick. I'm so nauseous over it. I'm so anxious over it. I'm so upset over it. I've been mourning the loss of the fullness of my experience my whole life, thinking someday I'll make it right, when in fact it's the attempt to make it right that's causing the impact of wrong. Constantly in my experience. It's already right. It's already fine. It's already good. You know what's right? What works. You know what's wrong? What doesn't work. You know what's really wrong? Thinking wrong is right, because all I'll do is what's wrong, thinking someday it'll get better. Pretty much describes an addiction.
All right. So that being said, what about anorexia or something like that? I can sit here and try to rationalize that by saying letting the devil in. But in reality, it is a fear that's control. It's the fear of control or losing control.
It's the
right?
fear you have in the present moment that what you are thinking about that's delusional can be controlled at all. And to think that you need control over something that's delusional is to think something insane is real. And that's exactly the definition of insanity.
Okay, I got it.
So the start point, we've talked about this past month, and it was kind of our early theme. It isn't about stopping something. It's about noticing what we're doing to start it. Because there's nothing to stop if it doesn't start. The train never stops. You're not getting run over by it. You could actually lay under the wheels and not get hurt. Right? So there's no collision there. You'd have to run into it really hard and fast. And that would seem pretty stupid if you just say, I just ran into a train, rather than a train ran into me. And that's kind of what we're doing. Actually, it's exactly what we're doing. So if we're thinking about it as being responsible for it and starting to embrace it as something we're doing because we are in fact doing it, we are in fact choosing it, and we are in fact responsible. If you simply start where you are and recognize that what's happening is what you are responsible for. And I would say your sponsor was giving you some of this direction to say not to focus on it, because when all you're doing is focusing on something that you don't want to have happen, you're focusing more on what isn't happening and wondering why it continues. These thoughts we have about things that aren't happening don't happen when we're paying attention to what is happening, because there is no narrative or story or lack or fractional aspect of all that is happening, because reality is not in parts and pieces, nor can it ever be. Same with truth, same with love, same with any principle. The basis of a principle is they do not change while we change. Nature, the nature of order, is principled. Why? It does what it does. What do we try to do? Figure out what that is. Why? Because we would work better and function better if we did. But if we're coming from a point of view that all we are is what we think, and then think more about it is going to be solved, it seems to be a mystery in the universe, rather than say, it is not a mystery at all for everything to be doing what it's doing, because it's doing what it's doing right now, regardless of what I think. And if my relationship with it is at odds, what am I going to do? Spend 20 years to try to uncover some fragment, rather than immediately say, I must know it, and what am I doing to deny it? What am I doing that isn't obvious? Einstein used to talk about going into his study and return to the child of the mind of a 9-year-old, because he was open then and not constricted by all the things he thought he needed to learn to be who he was. And what happened? Things looked very simple to him. They became very obvious to him. He did things that were so mind-blowing because the constriction of thought about it had seen it as a complete mystery and a complexity and an impossibility. And what did he do? Looked at it simply, accurately. What do we do now? We choose complexity. So we have, what do we have? Emotional complexes. Or simplicity. It doesn't, you know what's simple about simple? It's simple. And you know why? It doesn't change. And what does that mean? It is always our experience, always our ever-present state, always what we know, always. Why? It doesn't change. What changes? What we think about it all the time. So when I align my thinking by at least conceding that it is primary and my thinking is something I'm doing as a human, and human experience is secondary to it, a byproduct of it, I'm now aligned in my thinking, and I can think all the wrong thoughts I want. And what do I want to do? Get better at being right about those thoughts, rather than thinking those thoughts are right. Rather than impose myself on a conflict that's impossible to resolve by thinking wrong is right, I start saying what's wrong here is giving me information about what I'm doing that is lacking. And maybe if I begin to let go of the ideas I have that I keep reimposing, restarting, I'll have a better sense of things, because I'll have a relation to it built on peace rather than desperation, rather than reactiveness. And all of a sudden, I seem to start, I'll give you a good example. When you lose your keys, think about this. We lose our keys. Who was the last one that had our keys when they got lost? Yes, it's always us, unless somebody else lost them. So when you think you lost your keys, just begin to realize you know where they were. You were there when you did what you did with them to now think that they're lost. You were there. So just start thinking, oh, I know. I'm just unwilling to admit it. I'm just doing the same thing I normally do to make believe it's a big problem because I want to justify the fear I'm having right now about what I'm doing. And what am I doing? Thinking that the keys are my problem, when in fact it's the thinking I'm doing about them that's my problem, because in the present state of knowing, I know exactly where they are. I just don't want to admit it. I want to support the contention that somehow my life is miserable for all the other reasons that I don't even think I'm thinking, and not notice, oh, this is just another opportunity to turn idiocy into intelligence. And start functioning on a basis that's accurate rather than inaccurate.
And isn't it interesting that Einstein took himself back to that environment? You know,
Well, I would suggest that he's all in an absolute state of being. There is no age, none. There is no time. The universe was not saying when we got here, I'm getting so old. I'm so happy you're here and you're young. You know, the wrinkles in time have never asked for a facelift, right? Humans do that. We want to fight age and all that stuff. We're in a natural arc of birth, live, death. That's a human experience. It isn't death. It's just the demise, the disintegration of the integration of elements that came together to form the body that's really a life form, not life. We call it life because we think it's who we are. It isn't who we are. It's just something we have. We've been given a body, and to be given something so profound as this body and treat it irresponsibly is irresponsible. It doesn't mean we're not responsible. It means we're responsible for the irresponsibility. And to align that is to start to concede it and say, whatever's happening, I am doing it right now. And if I don't like it, interesting that I would be doing something I don't even claim to like to justify it shouldn't be happening and put myself in complete collision with what's actually happening in my own thinking by thinking it shouldn't be happening. How more immediate could that insanity be and not be said, what am I doing here? What am I, an idiot? The answer is yes. What am I, insane? Yes, it's insane to make believe that what isn't happening is all that's happening. While I'm thinking about things that aren't happening, what am I doing? Not paying attention to what is happening. What I'm worried about is what's about going to happen because I'm not paying attention now to what is happening. I know for sure it ain't going to go well because I'm not paying attention to what's actually happening. So there's a certainty coming out of it that I overlook and think is doubtful. So I keep asking questions, making believe that I'm lost when I'm actually trying to claim I've lost something that is impossible to ever find because it can't be lost. It's absolutely present all the time. The essence of our existence is not in question, so it is not in doubt. It doesn't think because it has nothing to think about because it absolutely knows. That is knowledge way beyond reason and understanding and thought.
it is deep.
And we are able to express that because the design of thinking is to express it, just like the design of a hose is not designed to create water, but to allow it to flow where you want it. We're channels, literally channels. And to dam the channel and claim that all we're there to do is to hold the water back and to hold our potential back and to hold everyone else back to prove that it's true and real is to diminish a capacity that could solve the problems we're facing now in the world that seem impossible in a matter of a nanosecond, because the thinking about it will start to look at it accurately. And my sense is it's taken us centuries and millennia to try to fracture in all the various ways we've created cultures and ideas about what's not going on. And it will take this amount of time when everybody starts to notice that everything that has been going on has always been going on, and it's happening right now accurately for all of us when we're willing to look. In human history, every time major lies effectively have been looked at accurately, everybody came on board very quickly after that, compared to the amount of time that those mythologies and superstitions and cultures and all of the fairy tales and the stories about turning imagination into truth and reality were told. We just have new stories for the same old shit. And I say shit because it is something that is designed to be gotten rid of because its usefulness has already been spent. There's nothing left. It's a waste product for good reason because there's nothing left in it that's valuable. So when we're thinking shitty thought, it makes sense that we talk about wanting to get our shit together. When we think who we are is based on shit, we're accurate. We're talking about it openly. I got shit to do. I really want to get my shit together. Think of that. How much more could we stink by getting more shit together and not notice that it's something nobody particularly wants more of? And yet it's twisted. It's a form of this admission that we're making publicly and yet thinking about it in the exact opposite terms that we're saying it. So when I say watch your words, I mean your words are expressing vocally what you're thinking, that you may start seeing that if my words are accurate about what I'm thinking, I didn't even realize I'm thinking that because the words I'm using are completely backward. And that's exactly all a lie ever is the attempt to be, a lie only lasts as long as it's thought to be true. And then it only lasts in the delusion that it can be true, not that it ever is true. So if a lie is a lie, it's no longer a lie. There's no power in it. There's no insistence in it. There's no persistence of it. Anything we're doing that's causing this impact and pressure is coming from something we're thinking that isn't true, and we think it is. That's it. So we can either think of each thought individually and think that someday we'll sort the trillions of thoughts we've ever had out, or we can think of thinking collectively and see it as something that we not each do, but all do, and start to see that the mechanics of it are the same. And the impacts will be the same for anybody who does the same thing, and start seeing it as something that we can actually learn to do better by being honest, and share better by allowing people the chance to notice that their own state of misery and emotional turmoil and all that is self-induced and self-imposed, exactly as the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about our alcoholism. So that's healing. And Loretta, to your point, forgiveness is giving things what they are in our thinking. And forgetfulness is thinking we're not thinking the things we're thinking. So we forget we're even doing it. What is that? Subconscious, seemingly subconscious. What are our primary motivations? In the subconscious. Why? Because we don't think they're there, because we don't see them. Like 4-year-olds were playing peekaboo and think because somebody covers their face, they're gone. And when they expose it again, they've miraculously appeared. Now I'm 67. It's a little too old to be thinking that way. My experience. I may have matured enough to just notice I'm not really interested in playing peekaboo the rest of my life.
Then why do you still keep playing peekaboo?
Well, because I'm insane to some degree to maintain ideas that aren't true. And I make believe they're not there. And to the degree that they are there, I experience the anxiety, and I begin to witness that those are body languages telling me I'm doing something wrong. And when I allow that, I begin to just observe it and live with it, and it continues to dissipate just naturally, because it dissolves rather than becomes a resolution of constantly trying to feel better about it by insisting it's real and something to feel better than. It begins to dissolve because it's being held as it is with no opposition. So there's no resistance. And a lie with no resistance is no longer a lie, because a lie as a lie ends up being true. If you admit you're lying, you end up telling the truth. Why? Because you're admitting you're no longer maintaining the lie.
I have a question. Regarding the prison experience. I feel like, I don't know, something that interests me is like, I recently wrote like a short film script about a guy who enters the witness protection program. And I don't know, I guess what interests me here is like, I feel like what we're talking about, this form of liberation in our specific context of like a prisoner, a literal one too. I feel like it is highly related to the crime itself, because there's like a hierarchy of crime in the prison system. And, if you committed some of the most like heinous offenses, I don't think you're afforded the opportunity to like tell the story that we're hearing today. So I just, I don't know. I was curious about that. Like informants, for instance, in prison, if they're found out that they were informants, from what my research says, it's they have a very difficult life, and usually driven to some kind of like suicide or murder or something.
Isn't it interesting, Nick, that part of the insanity of the mental obsession is keeping to ourselves what we know we're doing? As though if letting on to anyone else and talking about it would be divulging things that would diminish our appearance. And so we almost don't want to be informants of information about what we're actually doing in the name of thinking if we keep it to ourselves, we'll be better off. Like most people in prison would want to do if they were actually an informant. They certainly wouldn't go about telling everybody, I told on that guy. That wouldn't be the first thought.
Okay.
I was having a conversation with someone not too long ago when they were talking about someone that informed on someone, and the thinking that we had as far as like being a man and understanding what we signed on to as far as that lifestyle. You hit some truths there as far as like the hierarchy of people in prison, and it comes with who's the most who thinks the most devious thoughts to reach a certain outcome, and a lot of times that involves violence. But as far as speaking on the informant side of it, it's most of them, I would say all of us growing up, we had to learn somehow to be true to what we stood for, and then we failed. So there's a lot of people that informed on someone, but they just didn't do it on paperwork. It's like telling on your friend, or going telling a girl something, or telling on your brother or something, and then they learn, okay, now I got to learn how to be quiet. And then now you start seeing households where parents are raising children say, don't snitch on your brother and your sister. And it's like a sickness. It becomes this where prison is bigger than what you think. It's outside where we're confined to certain thoughts and the images that we see. Like you say, you wrote a film script, and it's like it's an idea of things. But the truth of it is you can only really speak on it if you are involved in it, and then to see the truth for what it is, and it's not entertaining. It's entertaining for people to want to, like me growing up, I wanted to go to juvenile hall because everyone threatened me with it. You're going to end up going to jail. And it's just like, I simply got to the point where I said, I don't give a fuck. That was my words to my dad and everything. He told me, he said, by the time you're 18, you're going to be in Folsom Prison. And I reminded him of that when he came to visit me. I said, man, you seen my future. And I said, because I signed on to the idea, like, well, shit, if that's where you see where I'm going to be, that's where I'm going to be. Not to blame him, but it's like, these are the things people gave up on me when I needed to be held. I needed to be understood. And so I said all that to say is when we think about what's happening, we got to think about what's happening inside of that person that's really going through that. And it's not just an idea of saying, okay, I want to be spooky. No, you want to show somebody something because it's entertaining so they know how it feels, how that person feels. So we take and we extract these things from it, like you extract oil from different things or whatever, and then we try to give it to people, but it's not going to be a true understanding because you have to go through that. It just becomes entertainment today.
Think too, David, and you can sort of address this, how isolating it is to think that you constantly have to keep things that are wrong to yourself for the sake of serving a group who is interested in doing more wrong. It's exactly what we're doing in our own thinking. And isn't that an isolation? Isn't that a form of isolation itself?
It is. I mean, at the end of the day, I was only able to be free because I told the truth in my story. Going to board, it's like, it's no longer, as we looked at it, it's like, okay, I'm just telling a story now. I'm not telling on anyone to get out of prison. In other words, it's saying, own up for your shit. So we remain quiet and say, okay, I did it. I ain't no use for me take anybody else down with me. But at the end of the day, you hold on to that idea and you go to the board and they look at you like, you know, you're full of it. Like you talk about that shit. You're full of shit. And we can tell. Tell us the truth until you start peeling away that layers of the layers of that onion and saying, you know what? I did this, but well, why did you do this? Because I was thinking this way. Well, why did you think that way? Because this happened to me. Why did that happen to you? You know, they start seeing who you really are and then saying, you know what? I think I can make the right decisions now because I see where the error of my ways and I was telling the truth. Those that don't tell the truth, they keep going in there, they're in there for 30, 40 years or something like that because they hold on to that idea that they don't want to talk about it.
Well, and I think what's telling also, David, is that the real fear started once you were out.
Yes.
Once you were facing freedom, what happens is responsibility and accountability are natural because freedom and responsibility and accountability are natural states.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
because
no
I know how to survive. You can drop me off anywhere. I know how to survive. But is it the right way? And that's what I was afraid of, saying I don't want to revert back to that stinking thinking, as we used to say. And I wanted to do the right things. And what is the right things? Is just live a normal life without thinking with the poison thoughts, saying, okay, how do I make a lot of money? Well, I could be a major drug dealer. You know, I know so many drug dealers. I can go over there and get a sack right now and say, okay, this is what I want to do. But what am I going to do? Poison the rest of my community? That's why we don't have a community in Venice right now. They're all poisoned and killed off. Like giving rats a gang of poison, you know,
well,
and killed off.
The idea that we're doing something to survive that's hurting other people means we're subjecting ourselves to a public that's getting worse, that threatens our survival.
Yes.
And the conflict is again revealed that these ideas we have that are short-sighted are exclusive of the inclusion of everyone, thinking it's good for me, it's good for everybody, when in fact, when it's only good for me, it's not good for anybody else. Because I'm acting as though I'm alone and independent and completely disconnected from the actual natural order of things, which is seamlessly interacting all the time. All of us are interacting with everything that's happening right now in the entire universe and whatever may or may not be beyond the edges of this universe. All of it, not some of it. To begin to think in those terms certainly doesn't allow a lot of time to be thinking about narrow-minded thoughts. It just begins to melt the edges and you realize how clearly and small those thoughts are that have taken up so much attention, consumed our attention to the point we thought that they were all that was going on because they were the only thing we were focused on. To your sponsor's point, Loretto. If I focus on my hand and say, God, the whole world looks like I'm looking through fingers in a hand, and think the world really looks that way rather than it's being caused by what I'm doing, which is exactly what happens in my vision of the world through the lens of the understanding I think I understand, when in fact I'm misunderstanding what's happening. I am only going to see a world that looks very different than it actually is. And any differentiation is not accurate, so it's got to be insane to make believe it's true. So insanity isn't something that's, isolated to just the few individuals who can't take care of themselves at all. There are a lot of functioning individuals who think they got it under control and make it look like they're okay that are struggling with the same mental problems. And we're seeing this today in an all-time high rate of suicide, drug addiction, and other forms of homicide that seem so inexplicable, but they're absolutely sane to expect within the insanity that's been maintained so long and considered to be normal. We have normalized insanity and disease rather than see that what's normal is health and healing. Healing, we think, is a miracle. The miracle is we think disease is normal. That's the insanity. That's the miracle. How could we possibly come to terms with disease as being normal if healing is, in fact, our nature? It would have to be insane to think that. And that's the miracle, that we can think insanity is reality, rather than notice that healing's not a miracle, it's natural. It happens. Look at what happens to go drive an axe into a tree and go back 2 years later and see what it does. It'll heal itself. Doesn't argue, doesn't tell you not to hit it. It just heals naturally. Can we poison things till they die? Yes. we're capable of that. Just like we're capable of killing ourselves in the name of thinking we're going to stop the thinking of the self we think we're killing, when in fact we're killing the body that simply created the thought of the self we think we are. That's insanity to be killing ourselves over that. We're not even killing the self we think we're killing. We're actually killing the whole experience we're having in the name of thinking we're getting rid of the thinking, while we're so unwilling because of the seeming fear to face what we're doing. And all we're doing is having a thought that we think is true that's false. And to see that in the simplest way is to see that all of that discontent and all of that seeming memberment of our experience, that fractured state that gives us the impression that we are worthless and nothing, is an accurate assessment of the worthlessness and the nothingness of the thinking we're doing, not the essence of our being and or the essence of our body or our human experience. We're just magnifying it to make it look like it's everything else but us, simply for the basis of not wanting to admit what we are doing individually. And that's why it is up to each of us to decide to look honestly or look dishonestly. That's the choice we have. We can be either be on or off. And when I'm on and think I'm off, I'm creating conflict. And when I'm off and think I'm on, I'm creating conflict. And when I allow things simply to be as they are, regardless of how it feels and how uncomfortable it is, the discomfort will dissipate because I won't be working to continue to create it, and it won't be growing in the same way that it has while I've been resisting it. And it seemed to persist as though it was happening to me, rather than becoming aware of the fact it's my own resistance to what's happening, the opposition to what's happening, the position I've taken in relation to what's happening that's causing the persistence, while I continue to maintain that position, thinking someday I'm going to actually drive that stake in the ground deep enough to make it real and true and make it stable and make it certain. It's not going to happen. Wrong will always be wrong. Why? It'll never work. And there's assurance even in that thought, to see how the absolute is revealed in the fact that you cannot do something wrong and have it succeed. But if you think it's wrong and it's actually right, it will succeed. And the confirmation of doing it will correct our thinking about it immediately. And yet when we try to do wrong and it doesn't work, we can start thinking what is right is the wrong thought. And someday we're going to make it that way, while the results will always fail. And there again, the certainty of the absolute is revealed. The assurance that it will always fail, always. That's certain. There's assurance. There's a starting point for a lack of desperation and a lack of doubt and a lack of uncertainty to choose the next thought, from freedom, from assurance, rather than risk and doubt and uncertainty and disturbance and fear and anxiety and stress and all those things that we do to constantly fuel this reactive cycle. And it's all imagined. It's just what we're doing. If you begin to see it as it is, it will dissipate and dissolve. It won't be a resolution, because you won't be applying over and over and over again the same solution, because it will literally disappear, dissolve, just like a drop of cyanide in the ocean has no impact. And that's a limited version of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about absolutely going away. On page, I want to read something really quick here if I can find it. I think I saved it. Page 84 in the big book. And we talk about Alcoholics Anonymous because it was one of the first major programs to have an impact on alcoholics internationally, because it was actually addressing things accurately and it was speaking to them accurately. And Bill Wilson also stated very clearly that the disease centered in the mind. He did not say the disease centered in the bottle or the symptom. So any symptom is caused by the same mental obsession, the same dis-ease, the same discomfort, the same lack of comfort, the same instability, the same unnatural, unhealthy, abnormal thinking, all of them. But he says, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. So we're not fighting to stop the thinking. We've stopped fighting everything, just looking at it as it is. For by this time, sanity will have returned. What are we doing? Looking at things honestly that are happening, not things that aren't happening constantly. We will seldom be interested in liquor. Why? Because I'm not creating the interminable inner conflict that drives me to think liquor is going to alter my state of awareness so that I can feel better about what I'm doing. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. When we feel that, we say, that's not going to work. It isn't going to happen. That result's going to be the same result I've always experienced, which is demoralizing, incomprehensibly demoralizing, because I cannot comprehend immorality. It isn't part of my nature to consider those things real, but byproducts of insanity. We react sanely and normally. Why? Sanity is normal for us. It's absolutely a state of being that we are aware of. And we will find that this has happened automatically. It doesn't say think about it a lot and go home and stay alone for a week and think about what you're doing. It says it will happen. It's as though it happens automatically. So it says we will find that this has happened automatically. Why? Because it's our natural present state of being right now, as we are now. We will see that our new attitude, meaning we have adjusted our thinking in relation to alcohol, toward liquor, has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. Here again, no thinking involved here. We've always known what was right. We just didn't think we did because we were obsessed in this preoccupation with thinking someday thinking would solve it, because we thought thinking was truth and reality. And as a result, who we are is truth and reality, and our life depended on thought. Not so. I'm going to read that again because I love this. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor, and I mean every symptom, including depression, including anxiety, including stress, including any effect that we're creating, has been given us, nothing we did for it. We don't even deserve it, but we get it without any thought or effort on our part. No effort. What have I been doing? Exhausting myself for years trying to think that anxiety and stress will someday be resolved if I can just overcome them. But what am I doing? I'm trying to get ahead of them and run faster than them, and they always seem to go with me. It's impossible if I'm creating it not to witness it and experience it. Impossible. We are not, it just comes, it says. It just comes. What? We're finally becoming aware of what's always been there. It isn't coming because it didn't go. We thought it was gone because of our preoccupation, thinking truth and reality was based on obsessive thinking. That is the miracle of it. We even think it's a miracle when it's actually natural. We're not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. We're not saying, I can't go to a bar, I can't hang around people. We're realizing we're free. We're absolutely free in nature. This thing that seemed to be so compelling and so destructive and so hurtful and so impossible to stop, all of a sudden doesn't have any impact on us. Why? Because we're thinking about it accurately rather than in the deceptive nature of our own concoction of thoughts. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality. Think of that. We're placed there, not by our own doing, not by our own effort, not by our own thoughts. We are placed there. We feel that. It's how it feels. Why? Because we're starting to wake up to the absolute natural state of our existence of having always been there. While I was paying attention to what wasn't happening, I was paying no attention to what was happening, while in fact I knew it all along, which is why I knew something was wrong. I would not feel what's wrong if I didn't have an absolute state of knowing what's right. So we feel like we're placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. Listen to the near-death experiences. If you've listened to Bill Grayson's book, Dr. Grayson, I think his first name was Bill, if I remember right, and or the Surviving Death, I think it's called, or something on Netflix. People who witness these near-death experiences, and I would say they're actually dead when they're witnessing this, have been pushed beyond the limits of their thought and all of a sudden are appearing to notice this welcomed, safe, and protected environment. They all talk about it. Absolute,
they talk
absolute
about it
presence.
again and again, yeah.
They just notice it's always there, already there. And what do they do when they think about coming back into their bodies? Interestingly, they don't want to come back because they know what's going to happen. because we have historically treated our bodies as though it's a contemptful behaving critter and think of it as something that is happening to us rather than really noticing it's the thinking we're doing about it. And when we're witnessing our own self, the way that the gentleman in prison that David talked about, face it, you're going to feel the fear that you've been resisting and running from as you do, but it will dissolve naturally because you will no longer be imposing it and building it a crescendo, that explosive nature of it that builds up, that we tend to, when we blow up on somebody or tend to get angry all of a sudden over some small thing, it's a buildup of all that stuff in our thinking that we're finally releasing. And it's the denial that we're doing it that has it build and build and build and think, we got this, that's under control. What's under control is like a volcano. It's going to blow. It's just a matter of time. We don't know when, but when it happens, we talk about being caught off guard, which is a pretty good indication that we're generally on guard. And that's the presumption we have in life, is that we need to be defensive and protective and constantly keep from actually admitting what we're doing and how we're thinking and how we're feeling and what our words are actually saying. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality. Neutrality is where you can choose freely to not choose. We no longer think that, think of the idea that it's our only choice. It wouldn't be a choice if it was the only choice. And yet we use choice as the excuse to claim we don't have choice. Choice always allows not to be chosen. Always. That's the point of choosing. If it isn't an option, we would not be talking about it. We would not be arguing over it. We would not be defending it. We would just be acting on it as we do, as our body does. Our heart beats, we don't think a lot about it until it hurts. We talked about that last week, I think, with Loretta. So we're taken to a place safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. We're not anymore saying, I can't do it, I can't do it. We don't even think about it. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. What is ego? Delusion. What is a lie? Delusion. It does not exist even when we think it does. It's the thinking we're doing about it that's causing the impact of depression, because the weight of it is unbearable to a being that's absolutely bound, not bound, but of truth, of reality. And if we are bound to that because it isn't optional and it isn't negotiable, there's no contempt in it like there is in the condemnation of the thinking we do. We feel contempt and condemn because we are doing things in our thoughts that are condemned because they have no place other than the thinking we're doing about them. It does not exist for us. Think of that. It has no existence. This isn't something to manage. There's nothing there to manage. We're managing an idea that is thinking about something that doesn't exist. How much management do we need to say, oh, I don't need to do that? I have no need to continue. Nothing. It doesn't take the stories and the history and the going back and the thinking about, and it's present now. It's what we do now that begins to introduce to thinking, whether it's going to be set off on a course of impossibility or all possibility. And one of the possibilities is to set that thinking off on an impossible course. And the other possibility is to think we didn't do it. Why? Because we're free. Freedom allows us to feel condemned if we want, which also allows us not to. And the way to do it is not try to fight it and stop it, but start to admit what we're doing because we're responsible for it the whole time. It says it does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. There is no confidence in this. There is no courage in this. There's just a lack of discouragement. We're no longer discouraged by what we're continuing to do. And it seems like courage, but it's just our natural state of ability we have to actually perform functionally. And again, life forms per form. That's what we're designed to do. We can act like we're all we think. We can do that, but it's an act. And we can also express all we know by starting to function in ways that will transcend anything we ever thought was a mystery or great in the universe. It'll start to naturally become part of that as something that is good for everybody rather than just me or you. When I get better in this thinking, everyone gets better. The boat rises when the sea rises. Everyone. And when I get worse, everyone suffers with me. I am not limited in the impact I have, and none of us are exclusive from the responsibility we all share. It is a principle, so it is not divisible. So nor are we afraid. We're neither cocky nor afraid. That is our experience. That's how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. I'll close the book hard on that point. What is fit spiritual condition? Recognizing that our nature is spiritual. Whatever that means is irrelevant to it, because if it's incomprehensible as an infinite source, there's no words we're going to put to it that will do anything but limit it. But if we notice, the words we use, while they might point at it, don't need to describe it. They don't need to define it perfectly for it to be what it is, regardless of what we think, and then as a result, regardless of what we feel, and then as a result, regardless of what we say and do. Because doing is a saying, saying is a doing, just as actions, outward actions are a doing, just as thought is an action. Thoughts are actions we choose to take. Why? Because there's something we do. Why? Because they happen when we choose them. And when all we're thinking about is delusion, we're thinking about nothing as everything. It's a choice. You can know this when you're willing to look at it accurately by the sensations you're having. And why common sense is so uncommon is because we have become desensitized, so our sense ability has become minimized, when in fact it's our nature. It isn't something we need to work for any more than we had to work for the freedom with the alcohol or the drugs or whatever it is we're free from as a symptom. They disappear because they never appeared other than an appearance we were making that had no substance, just like that face in the mirror. It isn't us, it's a reflection. And what is it reflecting? Us willing to stand in the mirror. And when all I do is stand in the face of my thoughts, trying to get my thoughts to figure myself out, when it's the self of thought I'm trying to figure out, I'm just asking for an interminable consequence that seems unbearable, because to a being, it can't bear it at all. But to human experience, it feels like all that's happening because it seems so compelling. And yet it's nothing other than imagining fantasy as reality. Another good definition of insanity. When we get a runny nose, we say we're sick. When we get running thoughts, we say we're fine. We go home and spend more time running the thoughts. Mental illness has been seen as something, just like alcoholism was, as something that is just a shame and should be hidden. And the stigma of it is much greater than alcohol, because it includes every compulsive behavior that are embarrassing to feel like you can't control and are destroying your life and the lives of the families and the friends and the people around us, because it undermines all our capacity to be in the face of that all the time. But when it's our own face we're denying, we are the participant that's causing it at the global level by simply not conceding it at the local level. And where are we?
Do you say they're erasing thoughts because the positive, negative, light, dark, God, Satan, whatever you want to call it, is competing for supremacy in the human mind?
No. I'm saying that when we think we can not be thinking what we're thinking, we create a chase that we can never. We create a dog chasing its tail, but he's like a Doberman with the tail cut off. He can't ever catch it. And every dog I've ever seen chase its tail and catch it always lets it go so they can start over again. We're creating those images, Nick, to justify it's something greater than us causing the problem, rather than simply saying the greater than us is everything, the greater in us is everything, the greater in us is something absolute and infinite. And to deny that gives us all sorts of reasons to justify all kinds of ideas about hatred and contempt and ghouls and goblins. And you know what those are? Conjured. That's what they used to call them. Conjured images. And what are the images we have that we think are true and real that aren't true and real? Conjured images. And what are they? Haunting when I live with them, thinking they're reality and true. I'm haunted by what I'm doing, not what's actually happening in the universe. And if I can be free from it, starting where I am with what I'm doing, what impact does that lie floating around the universe have on me? But nothing, except what I think about it in terms of the power I think it has to justify the sense of power I think my thoughts have to create reality and truth over thoughts that are simply imagined. If it has no power over me and I can be free wherever I am from a symptom, I am free of it and always have been, except to the thinking I do about it that causes the impressions that I'm suffering, the depressing impressions, by the way. You might enjoy listening to David's talk, David and my talk. We're going to do another one this next week. I want to invite and welcome Travis, who's here for the first time. Travis is an old friend of mine who has been on his last name's Magic, which I love because it's sort of like the spiritual path of seeming as though when you recognize this, that it's magic, when in fact the magic was the black magic we imposed on our experience by making believe we could deny reality and truth.
Hey, Jack. Nice to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyway,
Thanks,
Travis,
everybody.
Travis is a gentleman I've known for a long time. And Nick, it's good to see you. And Miss Primrose,
Hi.
Sturgis,
Hello, all.
Jana, Jackie P visibly now. So these are recorded for the benefit of people's ears everywhere, where they don't have to face the stigma of any mental disruption that they're dealing with by simply listening. And I assure you, there is no stigma to this at all, because if we're all doing it wrong, and it's a potential and possibility of the mechanics of thought to dysfunction this way, the chances are talking about it is actually going to bring relief to people's lives, rather than pretending we need to keep it to ourselves and continue to foster this conspiracy that everybody thinks that it shouldn't be talked about openly and honestly. And my sense is it becomes a badge of honor in the sense that it's honest and it's honorable to talk about the weaknesses and the frailties of this situation, because it's freeing to people to begin to recognize things as they are, rather than continue to perpetuate ideas about them as they are not, and make believe that someday, somehow things will get better, while we're carving out a life for ourselves as though we're independent of everything else and dependent only on what we're doing. And our whole life only evolves around what we think about what we're doing and how comfortable we are with what we're doing, when enough never seems to be enough in that kind of thinking. And start to really function on a basis where we realize that we have 8 billion people who have ears and eyes, and they may not all be functioning on the exact same level, but they are all functioning on whatever level they're functioning on. And if we begin to acknowledge it, we'll begin to admit that we have great capacity to both express and communicate what is already known, and wake people up to what they've always known and just been asleep to, in the name of thinking all that's going on is what they think. It's just an appearance. An appearance, it's like a ghost when the light comes on. They never seem to be there. They only seem to be there in the dark for kids. And no matter how many times you turn the light on, they never say it's not there when the light's out, because they can't prove it for sure. And for us to create that doubt and say there's nothing we can do to pretend that in the darkness we can't see it, is to be irresponsible for the things we're thinking that we don't want anything to do with, and think by not looking at them they're not happening, while in fact they're impacting our thinking and our actions and everyone else's at the same time. So it's probably worth looking at that honestly and starting to concede that, and think of these things that seem to be so incumbent on humanity that we have begun to think of human nature as unnatural and abnormal. That humans are just greedy, that they're just sick, that they're just aggressive, that they're just always needing more. That's not true, except to the sickness of the thinking. The reality is that everything that is here, that everything that everybody has been on Earth or grown since Earth started. The trees, the metals, all of it. The cars in the driveway all came from this planet. Nothing yet has come from outer space, except when it originally evolved from outer space and started as a planet that allowed for the hospitality of our own existence here. We're trying to get to Mars to figure out how to fuck it up so that we can avoid actually fixing what we've already screwed up here. Pretty interesting how far we'll leap in our imagination to go to something that's completely inhospitable and think that overcoming it with man-made creations is a solution, while not admitting the creation we've made here has been a problem. It's pretty sick, and also I find exhilarating to notice that this exploration is actually the adventure of a lifetime, because it's starting to notice life as our source rather than something that's only remotely occurring when I get what I want and get what I think I need. And then I'm always wondering why it never seems to be enough for very long.
I feel like it's kind of like our past, like the steps, forgiving people and getting rid of our resentment. That's the only way to move forward. So the only way to like deal with the earth is to forget, like be better towards the earth.
Well, if we're
and be and that you can't just say you're sorry to the earth. You also have to do a living amends and be kinder to the earth.
Well, if we were present in the thinking if we're present in the thinking we're doing, and if the thinking we're doing is noticed as what's happening and it begins to dissolve in terms of the sick thinking we're doing, we will naturally engage with nature because we're already engaged naturally with nature.
Our bodies are nature.
Yeah, well, it's part of nature. It's absolutely made up of the same elements that are in the universe. So
Right.
our thinking about it would naturally have us act in ways that would be more productive, and that would mean abundant. So we'd be doing much more than we needed to do for ourselves. So everybody would be benefiting. And if everybody did that, nobody would be grabbing and stealing and cheating and corrupting in the idea that we need to get it for ourselves. It would just eliminate it.
We would all live by, we know that we will have what we need when we need it by trusting nature and our higher power.
We wouldn't, we are.
We are. Yay, that's right.
Yes. So to consider, rather than ask what, to consider that is much more accurate to what's happening. That what's happening is happening, not why is what's happening happening, or what is happening. What's happening is always happening. We don't have to understand it for that to be true.
What's
It's just
happening is always happening. I hear your song.
So that it is happening is something we can think of with confidence and think of everything that's happening under that simple banner without having to think of it as something we need to do anything about because it's already happening. Our relationship to it now becomes a relationship to all of it built on peace. So our decisions will be much more constructive than the destructive decisions we make to try to tear down the thing we think we are that we know we're not.
Mm.
It just begins to shift it.
Question.
If we have survived as a species through thousands of years of thinking wrong about our existence, imagine the capacity we have to create and to solve and to innovate, not as me and you individually against the world, but as all of us collectively in favor of a world that has been in our favor the whole time. It's natural. It's a paradigm shift, just noticing that if we already know it and start talking about it openly, that knowing nature is going to start expressing itself in ways way beyond the thinking we're doing, because it will start to express what we know rather than only what we think we don't know. And fight for what we know, we need to think more about, we need to think more about what we know, when in fact knowing isn't a function of thought at all. It's a function of absolute state of being that's always present. So the whole shift is just seeing it's already happening. It's all that's ever been happening. And we've been choosing to think it isn't happening. That's all.
Hey, Jack, I'd love to hear your ideas of manifestation and that popular idea in the context of this topic.
So manifestate, when people always tend to come to me and say, I want to begin manifesting things I really want. And I say, well, you can start to admit that you've been a master at manifesting things you say and think you don't want, to think there's other things you do want. We are the manifestors of these conditions that we're talking about. And to Jackie's point, to be in favor of those things is to admit our culpability in the fact that we've created them. We are the manifestors of them. And to think that we're not is to think that it's only something we do when we like what we get, rather than start to see that when we don't like what we get, it's because we thought we would get something other than what we got, because the thinking we thought was so true and real that all we would get from it is what we imagined would happen rather than what actually happens. So that we're masters at manifestation, because our if the universe is consciousness, if that infinite source is consciousness, then our human consciousness is what our brain does. And if all we're relying on is our brain as though it's exclusive to that infinite consciousness, we are creating an echo chamber in our own thinking, like feedback, where you put a microphone that's designed to help people hear better into the speaker where nobody can hear anything at all because the screeching is so loud. Or a car that's backfiring because the cylinders aren't lined up and the spark plugs are going off at the wrong time, and it creates an inefficiency in the use of gas and the use of the power. Our power is absolute, and we create an inefficiency exactly as a engine would be, because we're misusing the understanding we have about the thinking we're doing. That's all. So the manifestation is natural, and all we've been doing is manifesting things to give us perspective about the things we don't want to claim we're actually doing. So we think of it as something out there rather than something we're causing right here.
Can I read something from page 87?
Please.
Okay, so this is just me. So if manifestation is thinking of things that would benefit you, this is what the book says. Be careful to make no requests for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. We are very careful to never pray for our own selfish needs. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing it, and it doesn't work. You can see why.
And you know what that is? The root of the second half of the 11th step. Asking only for God's will. Why would we only be asking for that if there was anything else, like self-will? And what does it go on to say? And the power to carry that out. Why? Because I am not under my own power. I am under, and we are under, the same power, which is absolute and all-knowing. It says it somewhere else in, I think on 86. An all-knowing daily repeated contingent on maintenance. We're having trouble. Oh, here it is. Him who has all knowledge and power. So power is knowledge. And present state of being is that knowledge. That's the absolute knowledge. Now, that knowledge doesn't think because it knows everything. It doesn't have anything to think about. And if we begin to see that thinking's design is to express that knowledge, not think about it, not conclude it, we begin to see that the mistakes we make are just miscalculations of thought. They are not reality screwing with us. They're just miscalculations of what we're thinking. And if we're sane, we're going to notice the miscalculation and begin to consider that it's what we're doing that's wrong. It's not happening to me, it's being caused by me. And that's my ability to learn, is my ability to witness what I'm actually doing and live with it and start to notice that my more intuitive sense, like finding the keys, my intuitive sense, my knowing beyond the thinking I'm doing, will begin to be recognized because my relationship to it will not be disturbed, but it will be at ease, not diseased, but comfortable. Not unstable, but stable. I will be aligned with it rather than maligned in the thinking I'm doing, because I'm naturally aligned with it. And the only thing that gives me the impression I'm not is not thinking about it accurately and conceding it is something that absolutely exists no matter what I think. And that's a big transition in this, is starting to see that this is not a negotiable option. And the irony is that when addiction says it's our only choice, we seem to think the only thing that we can then do is the thing that's killing us. But when it comes to an absolute nature, not being a choice can't condemn us because it gives us everything. Everything. Every possibility is possible within the realm of truth and reality and an infinite source. Everything for all of us. Not some of it, not some things, everything. And why wouldn't I feel guilty and ashamed to make believe that's not true? And what I need to do is get there. What I need to do is think about it more to be there. It sets me off on a collision course with reality and truth when there is no potential collision that will ever happen except my own thoughts thinking about themselves.
Huh. Wow. There you go.
So Travis, did that help?
Yeah, it's interesting. I study certain material, and I just wanted to hear kind of your perspective on that. But yeah, super helpful. Thank you.
So consider if the basis of an absolute is something that never changes, principles within the natural realm, the natural order of things, are evidence of that. And it means that things will always do what they do because they're based on principles. They don't have a decision to make in the process. If you put a seed, an oak seed, in the ground that's fertile and give it a little water, it's going to, guess what kind of tree it's going to grow?
Oak.
Very good. And the point is that we don't have to know what that is in that seed for it to do what it does, because its design is the knowing nature of its existence, and it will do exactly what it knows to do. So
What
we
if
as
we
we as
believed
humans think
with-
we're striving for perfection, when in fact all inanimate objects that we believe are less than we are operate in perfect unison, doing only what they are designed to do and interacting exactly as they are designed to do all the time, to allow us to have this experience to doubt the universe is true and real while making believe our thinking is.
What if we believed with all our heart and soul that it was a palm tree, not an acorn tree?
Well, you'd probably be very disappointed.
I believe a belief is just a thought we keep thinking. So
Yes,
what if
exactly. So an absolute source does not need belief, faith, hope, trust, or agreement. None. So if I don't have those things, or I think I need those things, I'm missing the point that it is what it is, regardless of what I think at all. That doesn't require us to believe in it. But when I start considering that it may be absolute, all of a sudden my thinking starts to align with what's actually happening in ways that confirm it, because I start thinking in ways I would never think I would even think, and start acting in ways I would never think I would act, and start seeing results that I would never think could happen. Because within that limited thinking, all I do is create limited experiences to confirm the thinking is all that there is, because that's reality. That's just the way it is. We're just screwed up. It's all there is. What am I going to do? Well, what you're going to do is keep doing the thing you're claiming you can't otherwise do by saying, what else am I going to do? Act oblivious does not mean the obvious disappears. It just is an action that's oblivious. So, Travis, to your point, the fundamentals of this thinking process is that responsibility, choice, and freedom are sort of a triangulation of thought, and they all work together with each other. So when I'm responsible, I'm free. And when I'm free, I'm able to make choices that are free. And when I think I'm irresponsible, I'm still responsible for the irresponsible thought. And what do I lose? My sense of freedom. And what do I get? My limitation on my choices. So what do I do? Only what I think I can do. And because I'm wrong, it's going to be wrong that I choose and think it's the only thing I can do. That's addiction. It's manifesting in the actions we take based on the thinking we're doing. So humans generally think what we need is a quick fix, because we only tend to deal with stuff reactively rather than proactively. And our work here, if we have any work to do, is to start to notice that our proactivity is starting to concede that we're already where we are. We've always been where we are. There is no other place we can be. So as soon as I start thinking I need to be somewhere else, with someone else, or something else, I'm starting from the thought that it's possible for me to not be where I am. And that is an impossibility, since I'm always where I am, since everything that's happening is always happening wherever I am, and that we are all connected, unified in that state of ever-present being. So we're never away from that, while we can think we are. So yikes tends to fit here. Like, could it be that simple? Yes, by the way. You know how simple is? Simple. You know why? It's not complex. You know what's complex? Thinking it's not simple. It's that simple. And to resign ourselves from the debate squad is to begin to see that assurance and reality doesn't have any doubt in it whatsoever, nor does it have questions in it, because it's not in question. It's an absolute state of being. Reality and truth, I would say, are good names for that. But there's lots of other: love, life, light, all those things. Think of light within our universe travels at light speed. It never builds up to light speed. It's always at light speed. Always. Always. And what's interesting about light speed is that if any of us could go light speed, time would have no impact on us whatsoever, which means space would have no impact on us, which reveals in our own universe the absolute symmetry of the fifth and sixth dimension, I would suggest, as I know them. And these are dimensions made by humans, not reality. In reality, the dimensions aren't divided. They're absolutely part of the same thing. So we can't possibly be living in the first, second, third, and fourth dimension without be living in all the other ones, whether we've defined them yet or understand them or not. We're part of it all. And if light speed itself literally contradicts the idea of time and space as being real, it starts to reveal that light and enlightenment and brilliance compared to density is our nature.
What if I believe with all I have that I'm in the sixth dimension?
You are. You don't need to believe it.
But I'm not experiencing sixth dimension stuff.
It doesn't matter. You're barely experiencing the first and second dimension yet so far.
Circumstances don't matter. Only state of being matters.
Well, I mean, think of matter. What is matter? It obstructs light. Matter is basically energy. So it's just taking a form. All matter is a form. Form isn't reality. It's just a shape something takes. Its reality is its essence. What's its essence? The same elements that our bodies are made of. What matters in our thinking doesn't matter in reality and truth. But we can think things that matter. We can choose those things. But as we think of them as things we're thinking rather than reality and truth, it allows us to actually see that we are free to have anything we want, anything we choose, anything that's possible can be ours, anything that's possible. And that freedom allows us to start acting in ways that those things, it'll become obvious. What became obvious to me is I already have everything. I don't have title to everything. I don't have control over everything. But if I've already been given everything, I have everything. So what is there to want? Answer, whatever I want. It's not a need. It isn't something I need to have to fulfill myself or to be somebody. It's just something I choose. Does it mean I'm always going to get exactly what I think? No, but I'm going to get feedback that's going to give me very, very clarifying information about the way my thinking is in relation to reality. And if I look at it accurately, I start learning quickly that I have a much greater sense than my thinking in my knowing by not relying at first on what I think, but actually starting to say, what do I know I know? Let me admit what I know I know. Let me admit what I'm aware of. By simply saying, I know, I'm aware, period.
Hey, okay, Jack, you said absolute meaning brilliance. What do you remember what you said?
Well, if I was giving names for things that we use to describe this infinite state.
Right. And I got brilliance.
Yeah. And brilliant. Think of, all the experiences. When I got stabbed, I had an experience that was a white light. It was like a whiteout rather than a blackout.
Wow.
Took me 10 years to realize that and I used to say to people, it was so interesting because I couldn't tell if it was in an inch deep or a million miles deep. It just couldn't seem to have any sense. And 10 years later, I thought, I know what the difference was. There was no shadow. It was pure light. This wasn't something that was obstructed by matter creating shadows. It's not the light we witness in our physical form, in our bodily form.
Right.
It's an absolute state of present light that didn't have any sense of depth because it had no space to it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't facing it from a point of view in a fourth dimension. It was the essence of what light actually is, which is unobstructed and absolute, in the same principled way we're talking about reality and truth. And so near-death experiences often see that, witness that, in the purity and come back and say, I don't even know how to explain it. Just as I spent 10 years trying to struggle before I said, there was no shadows. There was no shadows in it. That's what gave me no sense of depth.
Wow.
So if that is our ever-present state of awareness, and we think we need to be near death to witness it, that's how much and how far we are willing to go to protect and project an image of who we think we are, that we are afraid to let go of, to realize that we only seem to witness that thing once we get past the fear, just as David's friend did in prison, when he probably finally said, you know what, I'm here. And I'm not getting out because I think I should be out. I want to be out. I hope I'd be out. I wished I'd be out. I didn't. He just conceded, I'm here. This is it for right now. This is it. And to face that in actual terms is to also face all that fear built up. And I would say that's what the scream was. Wow. And when I asked David at first, what did he look like coming out of the cell? I knew exactly what he was going to say. Because I know when you get that out and are willing to face it, that sense of freedom is completely peaceful, and there is no rock, and there is no roll, and there is no potential collision that can even scare you anymore, because it's all just made up in thought, and there's nothing more immediate to my pain and pleasure zone in my brain than what I'm thinking. There's nothing that's immediately affecting that pain and pleasure any greater than what I'm thinking. So to think it's happening to me by someone else, somewhere else, sometime else, with something else, is to imagine I'm not doing what I'm doing, and again, try to project the idea that it's not me and I'm not causing it, so that I can blame and shame and fault everyone else while I feel blame and shame myself and guilt. Why? I'm guilty for that thought. I'm guilty for the action.
And so back to the screen in the piece, then the power of possibilities. Where do the power of possibilities are able to begin when you have that piece? Correct.
Well, we all have it. We're just pretending we don't, to the degree that we think our life depends on the thinking we're doing. We all have it now. That's part of this discussion, is starting to see that it does not go away. Something that is not optional and is essential, essence, does not go away when we think it isn't there. So if we're there now with it, and all we're witnessing for the most part is what we're doing in our thinking that gives us this compelling sense that it's all that's happening, that's the same kind of lying that we're doing on the most fundamental level of trying to think that what's happening isn't happening and all that's happening is what I think is happening.
But when do intuition and possibilities enter?
You're suggesting that they're not here.
Okay, well, they're here.
Even in the thought that they're, listen to your words and it will reveal your thoughts. We think about them as somewhere else, and they're not here when we're thinking they're not there. That gives thinking greater credit than reality and truth in our own thinking. That's insanity. That's impossible. So when you're talking about possibilities, there's nothing possible in that but impossibility. And that's certainly possible because we've largely witnessed that our whole lives. The seeming impossibility of always trying to get, never seem to get it. When we do, it's never what we thought it would be. Very demoralizing, because the essence of essence is that we've already got everything. We're just not thinking of it accurately. We're not thinking of it honestly. So we don't talk about it accurately or honestly and continue to perpetuate these mythologies and superstitions and all these phobias and think that someday we'll get them right if we think about them more, rather than say, wait a minute, if the absolute present state right now isn't that thing, there's nothing I'm thinking about that's ever about the moment. It's never about the present. It's always about something else, somewhere else, sometime else, always. Why? There is no story in the moment. There is no story in the present, because there is no narrative. It's an absolute state of present existence and awareness. Now, there's no story in that. It's the totality of all being all simultaneously. And Jackie, to your point, that's the fifth and sixth dimension. It's the beginning of that. So if we're there, we just don't think we're there, because we're not experiencing it. Why? Because we're experiencing the impact of the immediacy of the insane thoughts we're nurturing and harboring and making believe will someday be true if we just keep hanging on. And fear becomes a bully. Self-fear, self-centered fear, is a self-centered in thought. It's not even a self. It's not real. It's thought thinking of itself. So self-centered fear is the fear that we have when we think who we are is all we think. And we immediately become afraid, because we know if we keep thinking that, we're going to go to ends that are very, very, very contrary to our survival instincts. They're going to kill us. It's exactly what addiction is. The solution becomes the problem is the solution.
So
it's an impossibility.
So the magic of possibility, okay?
Not magic, it's normal. The magic is that we can imagine it isn't. That's the magic, and it's called black magic.
Okay, then let me rephrase. To enhance this possibility
Can't be done.
Okay. To daydream and manifest. What does that mean? Can you
You're already doing it.
Oh, come on, Jack. Let's do it a little further, though. Okay, I'm sitting here already doing it. But let's say I want to go further. Let's say
there is no further, Loretta. You ask me to go along with your thoughts that are wrong. In the name of thinking you'll get them right if I join you. I'm not interested in joining anyone on that trip because that trip has lasted as long as humanity has perpetuated it, and it hasn't worked yet. So I'm not here for that.
Manifestation suggests self-will to me. All I want to ask for is what God's will is for me, and take responsibility for stuff. And then that immediately gives forgiveness for everything. That's how simple it is at this point for me somehow. But if manifestation seems like you're asking for something that you want in a certain way, you're trying to manipulate it. And really, if we just take it down to bare bones, I feel like all I should be asking for is what God's will is, and then just ask for it and hang out.
Well, keep in mind, too, when we were given that direction, we were just beginning to grok, to begin to imagine that this thing actually even existed in a form that was constantly reliable rather than within the dictates that we had always thought of it. Follow?
Yeah.
So that book, 164 pages, is written to people who've never had this experience. But Bill doesn't say, hang on to that forever. He says, we're in trouble in the next paragraph, actually. If we rest on our laurel, we're bound to find trouble, basically. Why? What's our laurels? Making believe that what we do can just be redone. And what he's ultimately pointing at is to see that we've only ever had God's will. Ever. There's no possibility that there's anything else, because it says in the second half of the 11th step, if it's accurate, asking only for God's will. Why? Because that's all there is. And the power to carry it out. Why? Because we don't have any power in the lies we create and the ideas we have. They're delusional, seeming obstructions to make believe that we can obstruct reality and truth when we never have and never will. And to concede that is to begin to see the premise of this discussion is that thinking will never get us there. More thinking will never get us there. Less thinking will never get us there, because we are already there all the time now. Always have been, always will be. And that's what makes us sick, is to diminish our experience for the sake of thinking. Thinking is the solution, rather than allow our observatory capacity to recognize thinking is simply something we do. It's a functional capacity we have within a human experience, because we are the observer from an absolute state of being that is absolutely in perfect order all the time and knows better enough to know what's worse when it occurs. And what is that? My thinking. And when I begin to concede that, I begin to say, I've been given perfect guidance the whole time, and I've been fighting it by thinking I should overcome it and escape it and get away from it by feeling better about it, rather than conceding the bad it is and seeing it's only a thought that's bad and wrong. That's all I have. It's all that it is. It's all that it's ever been. It's imagined. It isn't true. And all of a sudden it is gone. There is no charge where there is no opposition.
So in the long run, no one can retain what does not belong to him by right of consciousness, nor be deprived of that which is truly his by the same supreme title.
Very good.
Emmett Fox, the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, it's been talked about. It hasn't been seen as an addiction to thinking. And it's the same trigger that causes all other addictions. And addictions are at an all-time high today. So are overdoses. So are suicides. So are crazy homicidal. Not that homicides at some point were sane, but the kind of homicides we're witnessing today are obviously on a level that suggests apparently the guy that killed the 10 people, in some nightclub didn't get invited to the party. He's 72 years old. They're looking for a motive. He wasn't invited to the party is what they think happened. Well, I would say that's overkill.
Hey, Jack. Sorry,
Travis, go ahead.
I have a question for you that maybe I interjected a little too soon here, but so how would you, how would you relate thinking as a function of reason and unreasonable desires of the body and those passions or whatever you might want to classify them as, how do you relate those two as being unhealthy and healthy of a relationship together?
They're intimately combined. Our bodies manifest sensations as a result of the thinking we do. And if we're thinking irresponsibly, our bodies are going to manifest things that are not healthy. They're uncomfortable, they're discomforting, we're discontent, we're irritated, we're bothered, we're anxious, we're struggling, we're causing effects that are witnessing an abnormal thought, because it's not normal to think things that aren't true are true. So our body's our guidance system, and our body language is telling us what we're doing. And what do we think of? Try to get away from it, try to get better than it, try to refine it, try to overcome it, try to feel better about it. Why? Because we think the thought's true and real. It isn't, it's just imagined. So our bodies in freedom would be creating, I would suggest, chemicals that would give us experiences that far exceed the chemicals we take in the substances we abuse to try to feel better, because our bodies are intimately designed to know exactly what to do to give us a sense of well-being. And when we're being well, we're thinking well. And we're thinking accurately and honestly and wholly about what we're doing, rather than in some bifurcated, fractured state of thought. So the consequences are immediate. Our prayers are always answered. And I would suggest every choice we ever make is a prayer, because we always want something based on that choice, always. Janet, to your asking only for God's will. If God's will is all there is, then we're based on that platform of already having everything God wants for us, a loving, healthy place in space as far as humanity goes. And then as far as our being goes, it's not even in space or in a place. It's just a presence of knowing. We've already got it. We're already there.
Every time you overcome a difficulty by prayer, you help the whole of the human race, past, present, and future, in a general way. When you faithfully put this into practice, you get immediate results.
Exactly, because prayers are always answered. And the choices we make are all prayers. And the consequence of those choices are immediate, because the effect is immediate. Cause and effect. If I don't cause anything, there's no effects. Bliss is effectively described as the absence of feeling. And what are we doing with drugs? Trying to eliminate the feelings we're having so that we can feel a state of bliss. It's an illusion, and it's a self-imposed experience that's temporary, and it always comes with a hangover of some sort, some depletion of our physical capacity, some threat or risk to it. But in the other direction, passion, in fact, unleashes the body's ability to maintain homeostasis, to bring balance to any imbalance in it naturally. And the healthier we are in our thinking, the healthier our body systems are to actually begin to accommodate us rather than put us at risk. So there again is manifestation built into that too, Travis. You can see that when I am undermining my ability to function as a human by having depressing thoughts, which are basically in collision, the pressure I create when I oppose something creates pressure, which is depressing when I maintain it, begins to impose and undermine my bodily functions, my systems, my parasympathetic system, my cardiac system, my vascular system, every system in my body that's designed to function my body begins to get undermined, because I'm actually causing stress, which undermines stress and inflammation, undermine every aspect of my physicality. And they're all witnesses to the thinking I'm doing, caused by the thinking, rather than letting go of the thoughts, starting to see they're just thoughts that are impacting me. They aren't real and true. I don't have to maintain them because I have no obligation to them whatsoever. And there is nothing to be obligated to. And I start to see, oh, I've always been free, thinking I'm not. Jack Kerouac said, the enlightened man recognizes he's always been enlightened. That is an old saying that has been passed down through the ages that we don't seem to pay attention to. Buddha talked about life is suffering. He didn't say life is suffering. What he said was attachment in life is suffering. He was describing addiction, desire, wants. There's nothing wrong with wanting something, but when we think it's true and real, we think it's the only thing we have to have. And when we don't get it, we think our promise is dashed, our hopes, our life. It isn't true. It's just a complete dramatic episode we're having to throw up on everybody.
So our lives are just a result of the kind of thoughts we have chosen to hold, and therefore they are of our own ordering, and therefore there is perfect justice in the universe, no suffering for another man's original sin, but the reaping of a harvest that we ourselves have sown. We have free will, but our free will lies in our choice of thought. The whole of our life's experience is but the outer experiences of our outer expression of our inner thought.
And the interesting thing is we are so free, to Emmett's point, as to be able to think we're not thinking what we're thinking and condemn us to an experience that life is contemptful and doubtful and uncertain and horrible and life-threatening. Those are all choices.
I can get a co-conspirator, like Loretta was trying to make you her co-conspirator. I could call Jackie and whine my ass off and tell her how sad I am and how fucked everything is, and she might.
You want me to tell you who the real co-conspirator is?
Me.
The self you think you are that you aren't.
Jesus.
That's the co-conspirator.
Oh, Jesus is our co-conspirator.
Think about
Jesus
this.
is co-conspiring.
That's why I don't call you Jackie, because you become my co-conspirator and my thoughts might go awry.
Think of this. Thinking about our thinking doesn't confirm who we are, it confirms our thinking.
Yes.
And what do we say? I'm thinking to myself. We're not. We're thinking about our thinking. We say, I'm thinking about myself. We're thinking to myself. I'm talking to myself. We're not. We are speaking to our thoughts. That's interesting. If we did that out loud, what would people say? That guy's crazy. What would they be? Correct. The real co-conspirator is the idea that the thoughts we have, David mentioned it, when that guy faced those thoughts and let go, he faced all the fear that had built up in him like a volcano and let out a scream that penetrated everybody else because they thought, I don't want to look honestly at that. Oh no, oh shit. And that what they're looking at is in fact shit. It's a waste. It's a waste product to make believe who we are is what we think. And yet we have imbued our body. Talk about manifestation, Travis, with stress that is so built into our system that we think it's normal, that yoga has become a huge industry to help unravel the tension. Why are we constantly undoing or trying to overcome rather than just not doing the thing that causes the tension? And notice that we're incredibly flexible, both in thought and in feeling and in words and in actions. They are absolutely flexible. We are not condemned to do anything at all. But we can make believe we are by making believe that all we believe in is what we think. And here again, Jackie shows how thinking, belief is a function of thought. Faith is a function of thought. If we have any faith and any belief in something real and true, all of a sudden we are confirmed in the belief, not because the belief got us there, but because we are aware of what's absolutely there. It just happens naturally, exactly as the book says. Automatically, no effort. Why? Because we're witnessing and aware of what's actually happening rather than what we've been making believe is happening. And any amount of belief in the right direction will confirm right. Any amount of belief in the wrong direction will confirm wrong. And if we don't like it, we're going to pretend it's right. And that problem is, in fact, the mental obsession. Thinking about our thinking is going to solve it is clear to any of us when you just witness the fact that you can observe your thoughts. Absolutely means you are not your thoughts. And we do it all day long and still confuse it by thinking that if we get more consumed by them, then they really are, in fact, all we are. Not so. So you can't even, Jana, you can't be at risk from Jackie's thoughts. What you are really at risk from is the one you're having about the thoughts you're having as being who you are and what yourself is, rather than the things you might use her as an excuse to justify. It's so immediate in our own experience that to not notice the responsibility we have both for causing it and also denying it is to make believe it isn't happening to us and it's going to be somebody else. I hear people say a lot, I need to get away from toxic people. I thought, well, if you weren't toxic, you wouldn't notice them. They wouldn't be there.
There you go, Jack. And
It's pretty interesting how certain we are about the wrongs in the world while we don't pay attention to the wrong we're thinking. Interesting. Our lens of understanding, Travis, to your understanding and reason are functions of thought. They are not functions of knowing, because knowing doesn't need any reason to be. It already is. Knowing doesn't need any thought to justify itself, because there is no justification for something that's absolute. There's none of those things that go on in that. Those are all functions of thought, all functions of the mechanic of thought.
I just like the three words, the magic of possibilities. You know, just those three words.
Do you want us to agree with you? I'm kidding.
So consider.
I'm kidding, Loretta. We love you, man.
Consider the Loretta, that possibility is always possible. So the possibility of possibility is possible. Things confirm themselves if you look at them. So what's wrong will always confirm what's wrong. And there's the assurance of the absolute revealing itself.
But the magic of possibilities lies in, kind of for me, in what possibilities are. Even though everything is possible.
I'm going to define magic for you really quickly. Because if it's just reality, it isn't magic. What's magic is the idea that we can create a delusion that we think is true. That's the magic. And they call it black magic for good reason.
Oh God, no, please
So
don't.
here's magic, the art of producing illusions. Let's just stop there. Well, it goes on to say, as entertainment, like David was talking about, by the use of sleight of hand, deceptive devices. That's the number one definition of magic. If this is reality and truth, it is not a production of illusions. The illusion is exactly as I'm saying. The magic is thinking that because we think of thinking, it thinks of a self that's real and true enough to be who we are. That's the magic. And they call it black magic because it's absent of any substance. So there's nothing to see at all. So when we look at it, it's pitch black and we can say there's nothing there, but in fact, we're seeing the darkness absolutely clearly. Why? Because we know it. We know what light is. We know what peace is. We know what stability is.
All right, maybe I'm talking about daydreaming, or dreaming. I don't know.
Well, don't worry. We're foraging through a forest here that hasn't been well enough spoken about to give great confidence. I deal with what I'm talking about all day long. I hear myself say things and think, what did I just say? Because it reveals my thinking that I don't always think I'm thinking. I think I'm on a path and realize when I hear the words, I think, wow, I'm not even thinking what I'm thinking. Those words are telling me I'm thinking something I'm not even seeing clearly. So I can admit that, say, okay, yeah, there's another path. I can take it. I can keep fighting for it. And I can also just notice it and live with it, just like I end up living with, where's the keys? And instead of saying where the keys are, I say, I know where the keys are. I just apparently don't think I know where the keys are. And miraculously, when I live with it, with that comfort, generally within 20 minutes, the thought occurs to me exactly where they are, because I knew where they were all along. I'm just so afraid of being wrong because I've been wrong so long, trying to look right, that I really don't want to admit that I might look wrong or have done something wrong. How sick is it to act like a 4-year-old at 67? Pretty good, huh? Talk about great capacity. That's a great capacity right there.
Well, it is, because, Picasso always said he painted all of his life to paint like a child again,
Yeah. Well, imagine if we're coming and in a present state that is timeless, that the youthfulness of that possibility is what possibility is, because it's always new. It's always greater than we could possibly think, because it contains the seeds and kernels of all that is actually possible, which means it can be done. And to live in that is to start to make those choices, to do those things, rather than struggle over what those things are, because we're so diminished in our thoughtful capacity, because we're always thinking about what's wrong is right and wondering why we struggle with what's right.
Oh my God, I just got that. I cannot believe it. And you start to make sense.
Again, you hear what you said, though. I cannot believe it. Do you see how belief is unnecessary when you begin to know what you know?
Oh, good Lord.
Very good, Loretta. Well done.
You're my co-conspirator, so I'm stuck.
Well, what's interesting is when we're in a conspiracy of totality and absolute, we begin to see that, in fact, when we talk about it honestly, it becomes obvious immediately. And people, just like you just said, will say things. If you look at the words, you'll start to see that you were actually saying it's unbelievable, because you realize belief is not necessary to know what you know and see what you see, because that knowingness is absolutely confirming in itself, because there's never any doubt in it. And the awareness of it is natural for us when we're looking at it accurately, because we seem to wake up to it when in fact we've never been asleep except in the illusion we were asleep to justify we're not doing what we're doing. It's only a dream. Well, we're doing the dreams we have at night too, and they seem pretty real, and yet we completely forget them when we wake up for the most part in the morning. Traces of them evaporate very quickly in the same way that this disillusion will occur to the things we thought were so real. When we start seeing them for what they are, they will dissolve because there is nothing there but a misty, foggy notion that we have made believe is so strong and real that it's actually a block in a wall. We've given it that narrative and that sensation in our own experience to justify it being real when it isn't. It's just a thought. And if you look at your thoughts closely, if you just sit and meditate and look at them, you'll see that they disappear because you'll see right through them. And if they're see-through, they cannot be blocks. And it doesn't require meditation to see this. My practice is recognizing that we are absolutely, if we are absolutely aware, we are absolutely aware 24 hours a day. And if that is the case, I want to begin to practice that in the face of the challenges I choose, in the face of the people and the conversations I run into, rather than think of it as only something I do 20 minutes 2 times a day to feel that and then wonder why life feels so difficult. I'm not applying my principles in all my affairs in that way. I'm applying it 20 minutes a day, twice a day to feel better so that I can make sense out of the world that makes no sense otherwise during the day. I want to be in that active, interactive state saying, what is it about my own experience that I am missing in the totality of being able to recognize how wrong I can be and start to concede it, so that fear begins to dissipate, and all of a sudden I can begin to witness what it seems to take near-death experiences to actually recognize near life, how near life actually is. It is immediate, it is present, it is here now. We don't think it is, so we don't experience it in the way that people who have these other experiences witness it. Listen to some of those shows. Listen to, I forget Dr. Grayson's book's name off the top of my head, but that show on Netflix that I think you can.
You mean about near-death experience?
Yeah, if you notice them, they're really describing what Carl Jung suggested as a vital spiritual experience that seemed to be imperative for anyone who is recovering from some seeming hopeless disease or symptom, addiction. It's the exact same experience. And someone defined the other night at a meeting that the bottom is when you stop digging. Right? So I look every day for a new bottom because I know that if I haven't learned something and I'm unwilling, that it's going to be that place that I finally concede where I am that becomes the bottom, because I can start from there to look up and start from there to begin to recognize that the nature of that absolute nature is always available. And it doesn't come from looking harder for it. It comes from conceding that it's always where I am. So by looking up and looking beyond the thoughts, I begin to notice there's everything beyond them, rather than the thing I think when I'm defending them, which is there's nothing to do but defend them, as though there's nothing else beyond them.
Okay.
So,
That's what I would define as magic of possibilities. It's like when you look up.
Yeah.
Just look up.
Well, and consider that looking up is metaphoric for an ever-present state of that white light that is not shadowed, isn't have any doubt in it, isn't uncertain. It's an absolute present state, just as the book described on 84 and 5, I believe it was, about that place protected and safe. We feel like we've been put in a place, just put there. Well, that's the place we've been given. That's the absolute state of our knowing awareness right now, always. So, love you guys.
Thank you.
We love you, Jack.
We love you too.
Thank you. We'll be back next week, and I'm going to include some of the announcement that everyone gets. Again, anyone listening, if you'd like the announcement we send out, you're welcome to join us. You're also welcome to listen, and I can also send you the announcement so you can see some of the written text that everybody gets in advance of the meeting to begin to sort of stimulate some of the thoughts that we end up talking about. Love and peace to all, everywhere. As it is, we are.
As it is, we are.
See you guys.
Love you.
Good to see
Love
you.
you.